This council invested in negotiations, dialogue, agreements, monitoring frameworks, and the regime exploited it, delaying, deceiving, and advancing its capabilities deep within underground mountains. It always claimed peaceful intent. It claimed it was not seeking nuclear weapons. Those claims have not matched its actions. Just a few weeks ago, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, was asked in an interview directly whether Iran has missiles with a range beyond 2,000 kilometers. He answered, and I quote him directly, not 2 years ago, a few weeks ago, and the direct quote, "We don't have those. We have intentionally kept the range of our missiles below 2,000 kilometers, so we don't have that capability. And we don't want to do that because we don't have any hostility against the United States people or Europeans whatsoever." That is what he told the world. And then last weekend, Iran launched missiles nearly 4,000 kilometers toward Diego Garcia, a remote island in the Indian Ocean that hosts a major joint US-UK military base. Double the range they claimed. That range reaches Paris, it reaches London, it reaches Athens, Copenhagen, Riga. Member of this council, your capitals are within reach. And if it has doubled once, it can double again, from 4,000 to 8,000 kilometers. That would make it capable of striking deep into the heart of the US. The regime has the capability, they have demonstrated it, and they are prepared to use it. No one is immune, no one is out of reach. Now they are trying to blackmail the international community. It will not work, and we cannot allow it to work. Today, these missiles carry conventional warheads. Imagine what they could do if they had nuclear ones.
The 10,125th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Algeria and Israel to participate in this meeting. It's so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Ramiz Al-Bakharov, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, and Mr. Nikolai Mladenov, High Representative for Gaza for the Board of Peace. It's so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in the meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov. Excuse me.
Mr. President, Excellencies, before turning to the Secretary General's report, I would like to express my grave concern over the ongoing escalation across the Middle East and convey my sincere condolences to the victims of the hostilities and express hope that diplomacy and peace will prevail. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of High Representative Mladenov and the progress made on the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 2803. The ceasefire must be upheld and consolidated through the full implementation of all elements of the resolution, including deployment of international stabilization force, disarmament of Hamas and other armed fractions in Gaza, and the handover of the governance responsibility to the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. The United Nations is engaged with all parties, maintains a strong field presence, and stands ready to assist in moving forward from humanitarian assistance towards recovery, reconstruction, and viable political horizon. Mr. President, today's briefing is devoted to the 37th report of the Secretary General on the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2334 of the year 2016, and it covers the period from 3rd December 2025 to 13 March 2026. Security Council Resolution 2334 calls on Israel to immediately and completely cease all settlement activity in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and to fully respect all of its legal obligations in this regard. Settlement activity has nevertheless continued at high levels. During the reporting period, Israeli planning authorities advanced and approved over 6,000 units in the occupied West Bank, including approximately 3,160 housing units in the Area C and 2,850 housing units in East Jerusalem. The Israeli Housing Ministry published tenders for 5,375 housing units in Area C, out of which 3,401 are located in the Area E1. On the 8th February, Israeli cabinet approved a series of measures that would expand Israeli civil authority in the occupied West Bank and further consolidate Israeli planning, enforcement, and administrative control, including in parts of Area A and B. These measures include transfer of Hebron municipal authorities, such as construction permits in the Ibrahimi Mosque, Tomb of Patriarchs, to Israeli authorities. The measures, which mostly require implementation via military orders, would also remove regulatory barriers on land acquisition and construction by Israelis and purport a shift certain authorities from the Palestinian Authority to the Israeli civil administration. On 15 February, the Israeli government approved a plan to resume land registration process in Area C of the occupied West Bank and allocated some 244 million shekels, approximately $78 million for this purpose. Demolitions and seizures of Palestinian-owned structures also accelerated, citing the lack of Israeli-issued building permits, which are almost impossible for Palestinians to obtain. Israeli authorities seized or forced people to demolish 429 structures in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, displacing 575 persons, including 290 children and 150 women. 28 of these structures were donor-funded. Evictions of Palestinians from their homes in occupied East Jerusalem also continued. On 4th January, the Israeli police forcibly evicted 2 Palestinian families from their apartments in Baton al-Hava area of Silvan in the occupied East Jerusalem, displacing 8 people. Settlers took over the building shortly after. This is the 6th eviction incidents in Baton al-Hava since February 2024. On 10 February 2026, Israeli authorities issued eviction notices against 11 Palestinian families in the same neighborhood, affecting approximately 80 individuals, including children. Mr. President, Security Council Resolution 2334 calls for an immediate steps to prevent all acts of violence against civilians, including acts of terror, as well as acts of provocation and destruction. Acts of violence against civilians continued with high numbers of fatal incidents, precluding from detailing all. The ceasefire in Gaza remained highly fragile since The ceasefire in Gaza remains highly fragile as Israel Defense Force military operations continued with airstrikes, sailing, and gunfire across the Strip, including in the vicinity of so-called Yellow Line, while Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups engaged in armed exchanges with IDF personnel. During the reporting period, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health, 292 Palestinians were killed in IDF airstrikes, shelling, and gunfire in Gaza, and 1,741 were injured. A total of 651 Palestinians were killed since the ceasefire went into effect. On 30th and 31st January, IDF carried out a series of airstrikes across Gaza, killing 33 Palestinians, including 7 women and 7 children. The IDF said it targeted Hamas and Islamic Jihad commanders and sites throughout Gaza after 8 militants emerged from a tunnel in Rafah on 30th January. 3 of them were killed and 1 captured. Meanwhile, the high levels of violence in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, continued at an alarming rate. Overall, in the occupied West Bank, 32 Palestinians, including 7 children, were killed during large-scale Israeli security forces operations, armed exchanges, settler attacks, and other incidents. 833 Palestinians, including 138 children, were injured, including 178 by Israeli security forces due to tear gas inhalation, and 141 by live munition, and 322 by Israeli settlers and other civilians. According to the Israeli sources, 2 Israeli civilians, including 1 woman, were killed by armed Palestinians, and another 49 Israelis, including 5 children and 5 women, and 4 Israeli security forces personnel were injured by Palestinians in shooting, stabbing, and ramming attacks and other incidents. The Israeli security forces arrested more than 1,600 Palestinians during raids and operations in the occupied West Bank. Israel currently holds at least 9,245 Palestinians, 3,358 of whom are in administrative detention. On 1st February, Israeli forces extended a military order designating Jenin, Tulkaram, and Nur Shams refugee camps and surrounding areas closed military zones until 31st March, prohibiting access without military issued permits, extending the ongoing displacement of some 33,000 of their residents, while continuing with the extensive destruction of homes and infrastructure in the camps. Daily settler-related attacks escalated, often in the presence of Israeli forces, resulting in casualty, property damage, and displacement in Palestinian communities across the occupied West Bank. On 16 December, an Israeli settler reportedly shot and killed an 18-year-old Palestinian near Tuku, Bethlehem, during the funeral procession for a 16-year-old Palestinian boy shot and killed by Israeli forces on 15 December. On 26 January, following repeated attacks and threats by Israeli settlers from 4 surrounding settlement outposts, the remaining 100 residents of Ras Ain al-Auja Bedouin community were forced to leave their community. This follows the forced displacement of 98 Palestinian households comprising 485 people on 8 and 19 January. On 27 January, around 100 Israeli settlers raided 4 communities in Masafer Yatta, south of Hebron, injuring 6 Palestinians, including 2 women and 1 child. Subsequently, on 7th March, an Israeli settler shot and killed a 27-year-old Palestinian man in Masafer Yatta, reportedly during an altercation after settlers trespassed near Palestinian homes in Area B. Including this incident between 2nd and 8th March, 6 Palestinians were killed in settler violence. Palestinian attacks against Israelis continued both in the occupied West Bank and Israel. On 26 December, a Palestinian man killed 2 Israelis, including a woman, and injured another 2, including 1 boy, in ramming and stabbing attacks near the Israeli cities of Bet Shea and Afula. During the holy month of Ramadan, as in the previous years, the Israeli authorities imposed restrictions on Palestinians from the West Bank visiting Al-Aqsa compound, limiting the number of additional permits issued for worshippers entering Jerusalem for Friday prayers, and allowing access only for certain age and gender categories. From 28 February, as part of broader security measures and limits on gathering imposed due to military escalation in the Middle East, Israeli authorities severely restricted access to Jerusalem Old City, including to the holy sites. Mr. President, the Security Council in its resolution 2334 calls upon both parties to refrain from provocative actions, incitement, and inflammatory rhetoric. Unfortunately, such acts continued. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad continued to praise terror attacks and to call for additional violence against the Israelis. A senior Fatah official called Israel neo-Nazis, while another said Israel is doomed to perish. Israeli ministers and members of the Knesset continued to call for the reestablishment of settlements in Gaza, the annexation of the West Bank, and the immigration of Palestinians from OPT, and for the continuing to kill the idea of Palestinian state. On 20 February, an Israeli Knesset member alongside dozens of activists crossed into the Gaza Strip, stating Gaza will always be ours. On 20 January, a Jerusalem municipal official expressed hope that Israel would throw out and annihilate all UNRWA personnel shortly after the UNRWA Sheikh Jarrah compound was seized and almost completely demolished by Israeli authorities in complete disregard of the legal framework applicable to these inviolable premises of the United Nations. On 25 January, the compound was set alight by unknown assailants. The Secretary General brought this issue to the attention of the President of the General Assembly and of the President of the Security Council on 28 January of 2026. Mr. President, Resolution 2334 reiterated calls by Middle East Quartet for affirmative steps to be taken immediately to reverse negative trends on the ground that are imperiling the two-state solution. On 24 January, President Abbas issued a decree amending the local elections law to require candidates to commit to the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people and to its program. On 2 February, he issued a decree authorizing direct elections to the Palestinian National Council on 1 November 2026. On 13 February, the Palestinian Authority published the draft interim constitution of the State of Palestine for a 60-day public review period. Following a request from the Central Electoral Commission, the United Nations deployed an electoral needs assessment mission from 16 to 24 February. Israel continued its unilateral withholding of Palestinian clearance revenues. The PA estimates that Israel is currently withholding more than 8 billion new Israeli shekels, deepening the PA fiscal crisis. Corresponding banking agreements essential for the Palestinian economy continue to be renewed on short-term basis, with most recent extensions set to expire on 28 March. In Gaza, about 1.4 million people remain displaced across 1,200 sites, many in non-crowded and unsafe conditions. Since the start of the military escalation in the Middle East, and as of mid-March, only limited fuel and humanitarian aid have entered Gaza for Kerem Shalom. On 30th December, Israel announced that it plans to suspend the operations of some international NGOs. The government also notified 37 NGOs that their registration would expire at the end of 2025. On 27 February, Israel Highest Court of Justice issued a temporary injunction blocking the registrations. Mr. President, in Resolution 2334, Security Council called upon all states to distinguish in their relevant dealings between the territory of Israel and the territories occupied since 1967. Resolution 2334 also called upon all parties to continue inter alia to exert collective efforts to launch credible negotiations on all file status issue in the Middle East peace process. On 14 January, the United States announced the start of the phase 2 of the comprehensive plan to end Gaza conflict, endorsed by the Security Council Resolution 2803. On 16 January, the United States announced the formation of a transitional Palestinian government for Gaza, the National Committee for Administration of Gaza, NCAG, as well as the appointment of the High Representative for Gaza. The committee convened in Cairo on 16 January and continued its preparation to assume transitional governance responsibility. The Board of Peace held meetings on 22 January and 19 February, during which member states pledged some $17 billion towards the reconstruction of Gaza. On 20 February, a liaison office was established between the Office of High Representative and the Palestinian Authority. On 1 February, Israel reopened the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt, allowing limited pedestrian movement in and out of the Strip. To the date, 848 people have left Gaza through Rafah, while 844 have returned. Following the military escalation in the Middle East on 28 February, the crossing was closed, reopening on 19 March. Mr. President, in closing, allow me to share the Secretary General's observations on implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2334 in the occupied Palestinian territory of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. First, the Israeli settlements expansion continues at rapid pace alongside the proliferation of outposts and steps promoting the annexation of the West Bank. I condemn the relentless Israeli settlement expansion in the West Bank, which continues to fuel tensions, impede access by the Palestinians to their land, and threaten the viability of a fully independent and contiguous Palestinian state. The rapidly expanding settlement footprint, including the expansion of settlement outposts, is taking place in conjunction with a rise in settler-related attacks. These developments are in breach of international law, further entrenching the unlawful Israeli occupation and undermining the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. I reiterate that all Israeli settlements and related infrastructure have no legal validity and are in flagrant violation of international law, including applicable UN resolutions, recalling in this regard the findings by the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion of 19 July 2024, which affirmed inter alia that the State of Israel is under an obligation to bring to an end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible. The government of Israel must abide by its obligation and international law. These unilateral Israeli steps steadily transform the landscape. I am deeply concerned by the government's decision to deepen Israeli administrative and territorial control of the West Bank. These measures are likely to increase Israeli control over the land and continue to settlement expansion and could lead to the dispossession of Palestinians of their property. They would also further undermine the Palestinian Authority, contravene existing agreements, breach relevant obligations under international law, and risk further destabilizing the situation on the ground, as well as seriously erode the prospects of a negotiated two-state solution. In addition to the settlement activities, Palestinians face displacement, demolitions, evictions, and crippling movement and access restrictions that stifle the economy and severely limit access to employment, hospitals, schools, and agricultural land. The residents continue to be denied the right to return home. The demolition and seizure of Palestinian structures entails numerous human rights violations and raise concerns about the risk of forcible transfer. I call on Israel to cease the demolition of Palestinian-owned structures in accordance with its international obligations. I also note with deep concern the recent report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights detailing Israel's discriminatory administration of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, with evidence-based finding on entrenched racial discrimination. The heightened level of violence in the West Bank is deeply alarming. I condemn all acts of violence against civilians. I am deeply concerned that persistent and intensifying settler attacks, sometimes in the proximity and with the support of Israeli security forces, are further displacing Palestinian communities. I call on Israel, as the occupying power, to protect the Palestinian population against attacks and intimidation. Palestinian attacks against Israelis must also cease. All perpetrators of violent attacks must be held accountable. I remain concerned about large numbers of Palestinians, including children, held by Israel, including in administrative detention without charge or trial. Reports of torture, ill treatment, including sexual violence and deaths in custody, are deeply disturbing. Israel must use detention as last resort, prevent ill treatment, and end administrative detention of all children. All detainees must be treated humanely, and those arbitrarily detained must be released. I am disturbed by multiple instances in which officials on all sides have glorified violence and engaged in dangerous provocations, incitement, and inflammatory language, which must be rejected by all. Israel's implementation of punitive economic and fiscal measures is destabilizing Palestinian institutions and threatening the viability of Palestinian Authority. I urge Israel to immediately cease all such unilateral steps. I encourage continued reforms by the Palestinian Authority and urge international partners to provide necessary support to this effort. I welcome ongoing electoral preparations, which are key to the reform processes. I reiterate my call to parties to respect and uphold the status quo at the holy sites in Jerusalem, in taking into account the special and historic role of Jordan. The launch of Phase 2 of the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict, including the establishment of the National Committee for Administration of Gaza, is an important step. It is critical that all parties fully abide by their commitments so that recovery can proceed in Gaza while advancing a credible political horizon towards a two-state solution. In coordination with the Palestinian Authority, the UN stands ready to support the committee's effort to provide critical public services, facilitate humanitarian aid, and lay the groundwork for reconstruction. I welcome the recovery of the body of the last hostage in Gaza. I am deeply relieved that all hostages have been reunited with their families or brought home for burial. All, as released hostages, continue to publicly share chilling details of their captivity, including accounts of sexual violence. I again strongly condemn the abhorrent terror attack by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups of 7 October 2023 and their prolonged holding of hostages in inhumane conditions. I condemn the continued killings and injury of civilians in Gaza, including women and children. Despite of the ceasefire, Israeli airstrike, exchanges of gunfire between both sides, and shelling, particularly near the so-called Yellow Line, and attacks on the civilians attempting to return home or access land, have resulted in further loss of life. I condemn the continued destruction by the Israeli security forces of large areas in Gaza Strip. Such incidents must immediately cease. The protection of civilians is paramount in any armed conflict. Parties to conflict have an obligation to respect international humanitarian law. I am deeply concerned by the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. While food security has improved due to increased aid and commercial deliveries, infrastructure damage is catastrophic, and there are severe shortages of clean water, medical care, and shelter. Humanitarian access remains restricted, with aid convoys facing logistical and security obstacles. I call on all parties to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including to facilitate the full, rapid, and unimpeded passage of humanitarian assistance. I strongly condemn the Israeli authorities' continued steps against UNRWA. These actions are inconsistent with Israel's clear obligations under international law. I again urge the government of Israel to immediately return and restore the UNRWA Sheikh Jarrah compound and our UNRWA premises to the United Nations without delay, along with any assets seized from them. I welcome the advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice on 22nd October, which reaffirmed several fundamental obligations of Israel under international law, such as obligation to cooperate with the United Nations, including UNRWA. I urge member states to continue politically support and financially sustain UNRWA. I remain committed to supporting Palestinians and Israelis in ending the unlawful occupation and resolving the conflict in line with international law, UN resolution, bilateral agreements, pursuing a two-state solution. Israel and a fully independent, democratic, contiguous, viable, sovereign Palestinian state, including both Gaza and the West Bank, leading side by side in peace and security, based on pre-1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. Mr. President, I thank you for your attention. This ends the presentation of the Secretary General's report. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Al-Akbarov for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Mladinov. Welcome.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, thank you for the opportunity to brief the Council today. And let me also begin by thanking Ramiz Al-Akbarov, the Deputy Special Coordinator in Jerusalem, for his excellent work and for his commitment to humanitarian principles. This is my first appearance in my capacity as High Representative for Gaza, and I want to begin by expressing my gratitude for the invitation and the opportunity to brief you today. Resolution 2803 endorsed US President Trump's comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict and authorized an institutional architecture for the transition in Gaza, including a Palestinian-led, apolitical, technocratic committee to administer the Gaza Strip. Without that resolution, nothing that I'm about to report would have been possible. I have had the privilege to brief this Council in different capacities as the Secretary General Special Representative for Iraq and as the Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process. I know the weight of the decisions taken here, and I know the credibility of every envoy before this Council rests on one thing: telling the truth, including when it is uncomfortable. This is what I intend to do today. Mr. President, I want to speak very plainly about what brought us here, because the transitional institutions that we're building, the framework we're implementing, and the choices we're asking the parties to make were precipitated by the catastrophe that this Council must never allow to be normalized. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched a premeditated and devastating attack on Israel. Over 1,200 people were killed in their homes at a music festival in their communities along the Gaza border. More than 250 people were taken hostage. It was the deadliest day for the Jewish people after the Holocaust. I condemned it then without reservation, and I do so again now. The trauma that happened has affected every single Israeli family. There is no cause, no grievance, no political objective that justifies the deliberate targeting and intentional slaughter of civilians. What followed was a military campaign in Gaza that has caused destruction and suffering on an immense scale. Over 2 million Palestinians have endured 17 months of war. Tens of thousands have been killed. Civilians have paid the price. 60 to 70% of infrastructure has been destroyed. The healthcare system has collapsed. The psychological wounds, particularly of children, will take a generation to heal, if they ever heal at all. I say this not to assign equivalence, but because this Council must hold both tragedies in full view simultaneously. The horror of October 7th does not diminish the suffering of the Palestinian people, and the suffering of the Palestinian people does not diminish the horror of October 7th. The purpose of the framework that this Council authorized and the 20-point plan is to ensure that neither tragedy is repeated ever again. The roots of the Gaza catastrophe extend beyond the lack of a political resolution to the Palestinian question or Hamas's 2 decades of militant control of the Gaza Strip. They have been exacerbated by years of systematic complacency towards extremism, complacency towards radicalism. This failure has resulted in immense human cost, affecting Palestinians, affecting Israelis, and people across the Middle East. The transition in Gaza must decisively address the underlying failures. Resolution 2803 speaks of decommissioning of weapons and of reconstruction, but both are essential, yet they remain insufficient without a concerted effort to challenge the ideologies that fuel violence and to establish a durable framework for sustainable peace and tolerance rooted in justice and the recognition of the rights of both peoples. Mr. President, 4 months ago, when this Council adopted the resolution, the ceasefire was basically 5 weeks old. The question of how armed groups in Gaza would be disarmed had no framework and no mechanism. Today, phase 1 of the comprehensive plan is largely complete. Despite challenges, the ceasefire has held. All hostages have been released and returned to their families. Initial humanitarian aid has been restored and scaled up alongside commercial goods. We should not take this for granted. This is the foundation on which everything else rests. I wish to thank the guarantors, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States, for their tireless efforts to this end. The National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, ably led by Dr. Ali Shahd, has been constituted. 15 Palestinian technocrats, approved by consensus among Palestinian factions, now form the incoming Transitional Civilian Authority for Gaza. Commissioners have been appointed across critical portfolios: social protection, health, education, infrastructure, and security. The National Committee is currently preparing to enter Gaza, and my office is supporting them in this process. The committee is a competent, transparent, transitional body endorsed by the Security Council and called for by the League of Arab States that provides the Palestinian people in Gaza with civilian administration while the broader question of Palestinian institutional reform is addressed. The National Committee exercises its authority solely on an interim basis. At the end state is a reformed Palestinian Authority capable of governing Gaza and the West Bank, and ultimately a pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. The NCAC, the National Committee, has taken the lead on preparing to secure the Gaza Strip. They have made strong progress in vetting tens of thousands of qualified Palestinian civilian police candidates who will form the backbone of law and order in Gaza. The response to the open recruitment process has been remarkable, with tens of thousands of potential recruits stepping forward within days of its launch to help rebuild Gaza's future. I want to express my gratitude to Egypt for agreeing to serve as the lead training partner for developing the core of this police force, which will be beginning in the coming weeks as their training begins now. Resolution 2803 also authorized the deployment of the International Stabilization Force, the ISF. Today, 5 countries are bringing that mandate to life through the commitment of troops: Indonesia, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, and Albania, operating under the command of the United States through Major General Jasper Jeffers. I want to commend these countries and the leadership of the United States and call on all member states of the UN to consider contributing to the International Stabilization Force. My office has also presented to the Palestinian factions a set of transitional principles that govern how the de facto authorities should transfer civilian ministries and civilian institutions in Gaza to the National Committee. Mr. President, perhaps the most significant development since November is one that by its nature has received the least public attention. My office, together with the guarantor states, the United States, Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar, has developed a comprehensive framework for the decommissioning and reintegration of armed groups in Gaza. This framework is agreed by all guarantors and has been formally presented to all relevant parties. Serious discussions are underway as we speak. I want to be precise about what decommissioning means in the context of Gaza. The comprehensive plan agreed by the parties establishes the principle of one authority, one law, and one weapon. That principle applies to all armed actors in the Gaza Strip without exception. It applies to Hamas and its military wing, the Al-Qassam brigades. It applies to Palestinian Islamic Jihad and its Al-Quds brigades. It applies to every other faction that maintains an armed capacity in Gaza, and it applies equally to the irregular armed formations that have emerged on the ground. It requires the complete decommissioning of weapons in the Gaza Strip and putting them under the control of the Transitional Palestinian Authority. The framework that we have developed and presented rests on 5 principles. First is reciprocity. Decommissioning proceeds in parallel with staged withdrawal. This is fundamental to the credibility of the entire process. Second is sequencing. The most dangerous weapons, rockets, heavy munitions, explosive devices, and assault rifles owned by the armed groups are addressed first. Tunnels must be neutralized. Personal weapons are addressed later through a registration and collection process. Thirdly is verification. Compliance will need to be monitored and verified. Reconstruction can only be unlocked after decommissioning stages are certified. This is the linkage that gives the framework its driving force. The people of Gaza want reconstruction, and reconstruction requires the decommissioning of weapons. Fourthly, the framework addresses the people, not just the weapons. It includes pathways for individuals currently affiliated with armed groups to re-enter civilian life with dignity through structured amnesty arrangements and reintegration programs. Fifth, my office has the authority to grant timeline extensions where parties are making good faith efforts. This is a managed process with built-in flexibility because the reality on the ground does not always conform to the timelines on paper. I will not go into operational details of the timelines or the status of our discussions with the parties. Agreement on the implementation of the framework requires space, and I ask all to respect that space. What I can tell the Council is this: the framework exists. It has been endorsed by all mediators, it has been presented to the parties, and the engagement on it is very serious. In our last meeting with Palestinian factions, the representatives of Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, and myself explained that the implementation of this framework is necessary for the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2803, and that is the only way to ensure that reconstruction in Gaza and Israeli military withdrawal happens. Mr. President, as tensions in the region escalate, with Israeli and US operations against the regime in Iran and Israel's operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon, with continuing drone and rocket attacks by Iran on Gulf countries and global shipping and energy threatened by Iran's closure of the Straits of Hormuz, we should not lose sight of the situation in Gaza. Allow me the opportunity of today's meeting to ask the Security Council members to support us in 2 areas. Firstly, to reiterate publicly and consistently that the decommissioning of weapons in Gaza is not only a fundamental requirement by UN Security Council Resolution 2803, but the only way forward that allows for reconstruction to happen. For reconstruction to happen and Israeli military withdrawal to take place, and for the rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and statehood to be pursued through meaningful negotiations. Secondly, I ask the Council members to use all means at their disposal to urge Hamas and all Palestinian factions to accept this framework without delay. Every hour, every day wasted carries a human cost and further erodes the prospects for credible and lasting peace. If realized, this framework would mark a fundamental point. The laying down of arms by militant groups would represent a decisive break from cycles of violence that have defined life in Gaza for decades. It would create the conditions for a unified and accountable Palestinian security structure, restore a single transitional authority, and allow for Gaza and the West Bank to be reunited under one reformed Palestinian national authority. For the people of Gaza, the implications are profound. Israeli military withdrawal and reconstructions at scale. It would open the door to sustained international investment, freedom of movement, and the rebuilding of institutions capable of delivering governance, justice, and opportunity for all. But, Mr. President, the full implementation of the comprehensive plan is also the only pathway that provides Israel with durable security. Israel has conducted multiple military operations in Gaza over the past 2 decades. The weapons have always returned. The tunnels have always been rebuilt. The cycle has been repeated over and over again. Only verified decommissioning, combined with a new professional police force exercising full control over the use of force, and a civilian administration with a stake in stability and focused on reforms, eliminates that threat permanently. That is what this framework offers Israel. I say this directly to those in Israel and elsewhere who argue that military control is the only option. The evidence of the last 20 years says the opposite. Verified decommissioning and accountable Palestinian governance does not trade away security. It can achieve what military action alone has not, provided it is given the space and the support to succeed. Mr. President, let me turn to several urgent matters that require attention by the parties. Despite significant improvements through the implementation of Phase 1, the situation in Gaza remains very, very difficult. Essential services are operating at the fraction of pre-war capacity. The healthcare system is in collapse. There is no functioning economy. I have commissioned a comprehensive needs assessment of the gaps, and my humanitarian team will present that in the coming days. But I will not wait for that assessment to tell the Council what is already obvious. First, the Rafah crossing must remain open and permit more people to cross in and out of Gaza. Any restriction on its operation directly impedes the implementation of Phase 2 of the ceasefire. Despite some setbacks due to the regional escalation, my team and I are working hard with Israel and with Egypt to ensure that the Rafah crossing reopens in the coming days, actually tomorrow, and the number of people allowed to cross over the next period of time should increase significantly. Second, aid and goods entering Gaza must be at least up to the levels agreed in the ceasefire. The current flow is not adequate for the scale of need, and we are engaging with the relevant Israeli authorities to ensure that the number of trucks allowed to bring goods into Gaza increases in the immediate future. The pipeline is ready, but access must be improved. Third, we must accelerate temporary housing solutions. Over 2 million people cannot continue to endure undignified living conditions. Our immediate priorities should be delivering prefabricated housing and transitional shelters, clearing rubble, and restoring access to basic services such as water, health, and sanitation to make existing areas habitable. This cannot wait for the full reconstruction program to begin. Fourth, and I want to be very clear about this, all parties must fully respect the ceasefire. Every violation, from whatever quarter, risks unraveling what has been painstakingly built over the last 5 months. The ceasefire is the foundation of the entire transition. I call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to honor the commitments that they have made. This Council should accept nothing less. Mr. President, if this process fails, if the current status quo is allowed to become permanent, the consequences will be devastating. A divided Gaza, with Hamas maintaining military and administrative control over 2 million people in roughly 50% of Gaza's territory, means those people continue to live in rubble, dependent on humanitarian aid, with no prospect for reconstruction. It means a generation of children growing up in conditions that breed despair and radicalization. And ultimately, it means the end of any credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. Let me be explicit about that last point. There can be no credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood if Gaza remains under the control of Hamas and other armed groups. That is why everyone, every member of this council, every state in the region, the Palestinian National Authority, and every Palestinian faction that cares about peace has an interest in the implementation of the 20-point comprehensive plan. Not because it is a perfect document. No plan is perfect, but because it is the only document that connects decommissioning, reconstruction, civilian transition, and the reunification of Palestinian institutions into a single sequence. If we are serious about advancing peace between Israelis and Palestinians, then we must be equally serious about implementing this plan. But, Mr. President, I do not want to leave the Council only with the cost of failure. Let me describe what success looks like, because it is worth fighting for. If this transition succeeds, the Gaza Strip will not simply be rebuilt. It will be built anew, and it will be built by Palestinians for Palestinians. Imagine a territory where goods flow freely through crossings, not trickling in under restrictions and closures, where a port handles commercial traffic, where young Palestinians are not queuing for humanitarian rations, but attending universities that have the freedom to pursue opportunities beyond Gaza and to return home with skills and investment that benefits their people, where electricity comes from a grid, not a generator, where a child born next year grows up in a house, not in a tent, and is educated in a school, not a shelter. None of this is fantasy. The resources exist, the pledges have been made. What stands between the Gaza of today and the Gaza that can be built is not money. It is a combination of unresolved security concerns, continued armed activity, and restrictions that hold these developments back. It is the perpetuation of armed structures and strict closures that make reconstruction impossible and that condemn over 2 million people to live as they live now. That is the choice before the parties. And that is the choice before this Council too. A renewed war or a new beginning. The status quo or a better future. There is no third option. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Mladinov for his briefing. It was an excellent briefing, and I thank you. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Deputy Special Coordinator Ramiz Al-Akbarov and Mr. Nikolai Mladinov, High Representative for Gaza, for their comprehensive briefings. President, the situation in the Middle East is becoming increasingly volatile, marked by escalating conflicts and the risk of regional and global conflagration and spillover. While multiple crises have distinct drivers, it is the unresolved question of Palestine that remains at the core of the Arab-Israeli conflict, perpetuating instability, shaping dynamics, fueling grievances, and undermining the prospects for a just and lasting peace. The Palestinian people continue to endure illegal occupation, dispossession, systemic violence, and the denial of their inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination. Over the past 2 years, their suffering has reached unprecedented levels, particularly in Gaza, where more than 71,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, have been killed. And violence has also intensified sharply in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where more than 1,100 Palestinians have been killed in the last couple of years. And in recent weeks, settler violence has reached its highest level since the United Nations began systematic tracking of this particular aspect. What we are witnessing is no longer a matter of isolated incidents, but organized, coordinated attacks against the Palestinian population. This is a direct consequence of an occupation system that has been allowed to operate with impunity. And let me underline that such measures violate international law, undermine the ongoing peace efforts, They run counter to the comprehensive plan, and they jeopardize the prospects of achieving a just and lasting peace. Just days ago, on 15th of March, fire was opened on a Palestinian family in the town of Tamun, where Ali Bani Auda, his wife Waid, and their two young sons, Uthman, aged 7, and Muhammad, aged 5, were killed. They were on their way to buy new clothes for the Eid, and two of their other children were wounded. And this was not a battlefield, it was a family car on a civilian road. And following this, a wave of settler attacks swept across the West Bank, where masked groups set fire to homes, burned mosques, destroyed vehicles, and injured dozens of civilians. As the occupying power, Israel bears legal obligation under international law to protect Palestinian civilians. That obligation is being violated, unfortunately, with impunity. So, President, despite these grim realities, the international community has pursued a path towards peace. The high-level conference in July and the General Assembly's endorsement of the New York Declaration last year established a multilateral pathway to a Palestinian state. And efforts by the United States, led by President Trump, supported by Arab and OIC countries, advanced the peace plan and facilitated the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, mobilizing regional and international actors around some of the key and urgent priorities. That is, ending the bloodshed, achieving a permanent ceasefire, responding to the humanitarian catastrophe, reuniting families with detainees and hostages, and reopening a credible political process towards Palestinian self-determination and statehood. These efforts culminated in Security Council Resolution 2803, which Pakistan supported as part of the group of 8 Arab and Islamic countries who were engaged in this process and in full alignment with the position of the State of Palestine and the Arab countries. The formation of the Executive Board for Gaza under the Board of Peace and the National Committee for Administration of Gaza and the appointment of the High Representative, who is with us today, are positive steps. What matters now is translating these developments into tangible, on-ground implementation. Looking ahead, Pakistan wishes to highlight the following points. First, settlement expansion must halt immediately in full compliance with Resolution 2334. Any measure aimed at altering the demographic, legal, or historical character of the occupied territories, including around Al-Haram al-Sharif, is illegal and must be reversed. In light of recent events, we further call for an immediate cessation of organized settler violence. Second, Resolution 2803 must be implemented in full and in good faith, including full implementation of the ceasefire and full, safe, and unimpeded humanitarian access to ensure humanitarian assistance at scale. Mr. Mladinov is right in saying that the achievements in the first phase of the comprehensive plan should not be taken for granted. And we think that the second phase of the comprehensive plan must now be implemented without delay. And let me emphasize here the central and indispensable role of the Palestinian Authority in this process. Third, reconstruction should begin forthwith with no annexation, forced displacement, or fragmentation of the occupied Palestinian land. Fourth, accountability. We should not forget this aspect. Accountability is indispensable. Without justice and respect for international law, there can be no durable peace. Perpetrators of violence against civilians, including those involved in settler attacks, must be brought to justice. And fifth, a time-bound and irreversible political process anchored in relevant UN resolutions must lead to the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and contiguous state of Palestine on the basis of the pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. That is the best guarantee for durable peace and stability in the region. Pakistan's solidarity with the Palestinian people remains unwavering. We stand firmly with them in their legitimate struggle against occupation, for their dignity, justice, and self-determination, and for the realization of an independent Palestinian state in accordance with international legitimacy. President, we are deeply concerned at the evolving situation in the broader Middle East. In fact, the region stands at a perilous crossroad with risk of wider conflagration and far-reaching consequences. Against this already dire backdrop, further escalation must be avoided at all costs. We call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint. And the ultimate aim must be cessation of all hostilities and moving towards peaceful resolution of all issues. And together with other partners, Pakistan is actively engaged in promoting this objective. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alakbarov and Mr. Mladenov for their briefings. At present, the conflict in the Middle East continues to expand, and tensions are escalating rapidly, causing serious consequences for regional stability and the global economy. At the same time, the Palestinian question is deteriorating at an accelerated pace. Shelling in Gaza continues. Settlement activities in the West Bank are intensifying, and the foundation of the two-state solution is at risk of being further eroded. In the face of this grave situation, the international community must demonstrate strong political will and take decisive actions to advance a comprehensive, just, and lasting resolution to the Palestinian question at the earliest possible date. I will make 3 points. First, we must prioritize human life and immediately end the suffering of the people of Gaza. Since the ceasefire agreement was reached, Israel has continued to launch attacks, killing more than 600 Gazans. Recently, Israel has further tightened restrictions on humanitarian access and closed the Rafah crossing for many times, further worsening the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The situation in Gaza concerns the very foundation of international morality. China calls on all parties concerned, especially Israel, to fully comply with the ceasefire agreement and achieve a genuine, comprehensive, and lasting ceasefire. Israel must fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law, fully open border crossings, lift restrictions on humanitarian access, and cease attacks on humanitarian organizations, especially UNRWA. Second, we must uphold the rule of international law and resolutely end illegal activities in the West Bank. Recently, the occupying power has accelerated its settlement policies and expanded settlement activities, leading to the displacement of more than 36,000 Palestinians in the West Bank over the past year. Violent incidents involving settlers have sharply increased, causing numerous Palestinian civilian casualties and significant property damage. On March the 15th, 4 Palestinian civilians were fatally shot by Israeli security forces, which is deeply shocking. Settlement activities constitute a serious violation of international law and Security Council Resolution 2334. Any violence against civilians must be condemned. Israel must immediately stop settlement activities, curb settler violence, refrain from the excessive use of force against civilians, investigate and hold accountable those responsible for attacks on civilians, and put an end to impunity. Third, we must uphold fairness and justice and accelerate efforts to advance the two-state solution. There is only one universally recognized and reasonable path to the question of Palestine, which is the two-state solution. Any other alternative arrangements or new mechanisms must uphold the principle of Palestinians governing Palestine, respect the will of the Palestinian people, and support instead of undermine the two-state solution. Relevant country should, in accordance with the requirements of the Security Council Resolution 2803, brief the Security Council on the situation in a timely manner. Gaza and the West Bank are both integral parts of the State of Palestine. The international community must firmly reject any attempt to annex Palestinian territory and oppose unilateral actions that erode the foundation of the two-state solution. The international community cannot accept the Palestinian question being marginalized once again and make irreversible steps to advance the two-state solution and support the establishment of independent state of Palestine at an early date. The UN has the responsibility to play a leading role in this process. China will continue to work with the international community to promote a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire in Gaza and the humanitarian catastrophe, implement the two-state solution, and help restore justice to the state of Palestine and restore peace to its population and the region of the Middle East. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Mr. President, at the outset, I'd like to thank Mr. Alakbarov, the Deputy Special Coordinator for the Peace Process in the Middle East. We thank him for his briefing, which reflects the developments on the ground. We would also like to thank Mr. Mladinov, the High Representative for the Gaza Strip on the Board of Peace, for his intervention. The latest report on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2334 of the year 2016 presents a very disturbing picture of the continued deterioration of the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem. This report once again affirms the growing gap between what this Council decides and the reality on the ground. Security Council Resolution 2334 is clear and unambiguous. It affirms that the construction of settlements in Palestinian territories occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, such construction has no legal legitimacy and constitutes a flagrant violation under international law. However, and almost a decade after the adoption of this resolution, settlement activity continues at an accelerated pace. This systematically undermines the possibility of a viable and geographically contiguous Palestinian state. It weakens the prospects of a two-state solution. Mr. President, the Republic of Somalia expresses its grave concern over the continued confiscation of lands and demolition of homes and the forced displacement of Palestinians, including women and children. In this context, we follow with great concern the eviction orders issued against a number of Palestinian families in Batn al-Hawa neighborhood in Silwan in East Jerusalem, which may lead to the forced displacement and the creation of a new reality on the ground. Such measures are a clear violation of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and deepen the humanitarian suffering and undermine the prospects for peace. We are deeply concerned about the policies and actions that seek to entrench the reality of gradual annexation and the expansion of administrative control over land in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. This includes land registration measures and settlement expansion. These practices undermine the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. They run counter to the norms of international law and weaken the international order that is based on respect for international law in all circumstances. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, especially in the Gaza Strip, remains a source for grave concern. Despite some efforts to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance, the scale of the needs is far greater than the size of the current response. And we stress the need to ensure that humanitarian access is guaranteed in a manner that is full, safe, sustainable, and unhindered, and using all available crossings, and in a manner that would enable United Nations agencies, including UNRWA, to perform their vital mandates in providing life-saving support. We stress the need to protect civilians and to respect the principles of international humanitarian law, including the principles of distinction, proportionality, and accountability. We affirm that targeting civilians or civilian infrastructure is completely unacceptable. We stress the importance of respecting the existing ceasefire. We call for the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 2803 in a manner that would contribute towards alleviating human suffering and creates the necessary conditions for a sustainable political process. Mr. President, the continued lack of accountability for the violations perpetrated undermines the credibility of the Security Council. It sends a dangerous message that states that violating international law can go unpunished. And in this spirit, we underscore the need for the international community to take concrete steps to ensure that illegal settlement activities are not supported or enabled, including through commercial or investment activities that contribute towards the entrenchment of this existing imbalance. We stress the need to set clear legal and diplomatic red lines and to take appropriate measures to ensure respect for international law and to prevent any actions aimed at changing the demographic or geographic character of the occupied Palestinian territories. Mr. President, achieving a just and lasting peace in the Middle East requires genuine political will. It means refraining from taking unilateral steps that undermine the chances of peace. It requires a serious commitment to a credible political process that is based on the resolutions of international legitimacy and the principle of the two-state solution. Here, we reaffirm the need to end the Israeli occupation as the only means to achieving a just and lasting and comprehensive peace in the region. In closing, Somalia reaffirms its unwavering support for the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and the establishment of their independent and sovereign state on the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. Somalia will continue to stand by the Palestinian people as they strive legitimately towards freedom, dignity, and a just and lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I also thank Deputy Special Coordinator Al Akbarov and High Representative for Gaza, Mr. Mladenov, for briefing us today. The United Kingdom remains deeply concerned by the conflict in the Middle East and its impact upon civilians. Together with partners, we continue to strive for a swift resolution to this crisis. And we cannot let this current period of crisis in the region distract us from the need to make progress on the 20-point plan for Gaza or from the deeply concerning trajectory in the West Bank. So I'll make 3 points. First, the parties and this Council, through Resolution 2803, have expressed their backing for President Trump's 20-point plan. But Gaza today remains unacceptably divided. Repeated violations of the ceasefire are costing lives and undermining progress for peace. It is essential that swift progress is made to implement Phase 2. Hamas has no future in the governance of Gaza. It and other militant groups must demilitarize, and I welcome and fully support High Representative Mladenov's remarks on the importance of full decommissioning. Swift progress also means the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza being given full support to lead the day-to-day administration of Gaza during the transition to Palestinian Authority governance, delivering for the Palestinian people's immediate needs and the crucial recovery efforts needed across the Gaza Strip. Second, Resolution 2803 is clear on the need for the full resumption of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Yet for weeks, Israel has restricted the delivery of humanitarian aid to one single crossing. Last week, 1,063 trucks were offloaded, just 1/4 of the weekly target of 4,200 trucks. And Israel's closure of the Rafah crossing on 28 February for 18 days delayed life-saving medical evacuations for thousands. This is wholly unacceptable. A lack of essential goods is driving up commercial prices, while shelter materials, critical medical supplies, fuel and repair equipment remain blocked by Israel under long-standing dual-use restrictions. At the same time, the government of Israel's deregistration measures are shrinking the space for international NGOs in Palestine. The UN and its partners, including UNRWA and international NGOs, must be able to operate unimpeded in Gaza, with access to all parts of the Strip, and the supplies needed to deliver essential and life-saving services. Finally, we cannot successfully implement the 20-point plan without resolving the situation in the West Bank. The UK has repeatedly and strongly condemned Israeli steps to expand control over the West Bank. We have been clear. Israeli settlements in the West Bank are illegal under international law, and the severe economic restrictions imposed by Israel are significantly undermining peace efforts. The UK is appalled by recent killings, reports of sexual assault, torture and degrading treatment of Palestinians at the hands of violent settlers. We strongly condemn settler violence and terror, including the spate of attacks on West Bank villages over the weekend. Since February 28, we've seen 6 Palestinians shot dead by settlers, as well as the killing of Palestinian children by Israeli forces. This is completely unacceptable, as is the apparent lack of accountability for countless reports of human rights violations at the Sderei Teiman facility. The Israeli government must take concrete steps to prevent any such egregious actions and ensure accountability. Impunity for such horrific actions is inconsistent with international law. President, we still have the opportunity to end the cycle of violence and build a better future for the region, a better future for the next Israeli and Palestinian generations. A two-state solution is the only way to achieve this. There is no alternative. Together and urgently, we must preserve the land and the people of Palestine so that a two-state solution remains viable. To promote peace, security and stability, the Israeli government must reverse the Security Cabinet's decision to expand control over the West Bank and take urgent action to halt the escalating violence and hold perpetrators accountable. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
شكرا سيد الرئيس على عقد هذه الجلسة الهامة. كما أتقدم بخالص الشكر إلى مقدم.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this important session. I thank the briefers, Dr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, and Mr. Nikolai Mladinov, the High Representative for Gaza and Board of Peace, for his important and valuable briefing. Mr. President, in light of the developments in the Middle East, particularly the Iranian attacks targeting several countries in the region, including GCC member states and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and of course my country, the Kingdom of Bahrain. In light of these developments, we reaffirm our condemnation of these attacks, which represent a blatant violation of international law and the Charter of the UN. It is also a threat, a direct threat to regional and international peace and stability. In this context, we further recall Security Council Resolution 2817, which condemned these acts of aggression and reaffirmed the right of sovereign states to protect their lands, and rejected the use of force in ways that violated international law and the UN Charter. We also stress the importance of safeguarding maritime security and freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and all other vital water routes, given their direct impact on the stability of global trade, energy supplies, and global economy. Mr. President, on the occasion of Eid al-Fitr, we seize the opportunity to express hopes and prayers for peace, security, and prosperity for all. We also express our best wishes for Easter, stressing the importance of safeguarding freedom of religion and conviction and the ability to practice religious rituals in safety and peace. However, celebrating these religious holidays has become impossible in Jerusalem, one of the most sacred and spiritual cities in the world. Al-Aqsa Mosque was closed during the month of Ramadan for the longest period since 1967. Christian pilgrims stopped also for the third time this year due to the closure of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and other Christian holy sites. These acts constitute a blatant violation of international law and international humanitarian law, as well as the historic and legal status quo, as well and the principle of unrestricted free access to places of worship. Meanwhile, extremist voices continue to emerge, advocating hatred and calling for the demolition of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a phenomenon that we call and should be condemned and halted immediately, because such calls contradict with international principles calling for coexistence and respect of freedom of worship, safeguarding holy sites, as well as human dignity and basic rights. Mr. President, in light of the above and in the context of today's briefing, I would like to stress the following points. First, we point to the developments related to Israeli settlement activities and the concerning increase in settlers' violence against West Bank residents. We also note the Israeli decisions in February 2026 aiming at imposing large-scale expansionist alterations in the West Bank. These measures include a reclassification of the Palestinian land to so-called state land and to accelerate illegal settlement activities. We further express our deep concern regarding UN reports confirming the displacement of more than 36,000 Palestinians in 1 year due to these settlement activities. These violations must be halted immediately as they undermine efforts for achieving peace. And we recall in this regard Security Council Resolution 2334 of 2016, which underscores the illegal nature of settlement activities and calls for halting them immediately. Second, we commend the efforts made in the framework of the Board of Peace. And before that, there was the adoption of Resolution 2803. And we point to our contribution as a member of the board, which is reflected in establishing a digital government and government services platform for Gaza Strip to support efforts of reconstruction and improve basic services to the people in Gaza. We stress also the need to accelerate the delivery of humanitarian aid without delay, given the dire humanitarian conditions prevailing in Gaza Strip. Third, we stress the need to fully support the Palestinian government and the need to release withheld Palestinian tax revenues. We call also for lifting the restrictions on financial and banking transactions in Gaza and the West Bank to allow the Palestinian government to adopt the budget needed to run its activities effectively. We support efforts to strengthen democracy, including by organizing local elections, and then the elections for the Palestinian National Council later this year. This is a proof of the Palestinian government's ability to carry out the necessary reforms to consolidate democratic practices toward achieving and fulfilling the aspiration of the brotherly people of Palestine. In conclusion, the Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms that despite the brutal, coward, and unjustified Iranian aggression against the kingdom, which was condemned by the international community through Security Council Resolution 2817, yet the kingdom remains committed to upholding its obligations toward the Palestinian question and toward efforts that promote sustainable peace and stability in the Middle East. Bahrain also reiterates its firm commitment to achieving a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in the Middle East on the basis of the two-state solution consistent with the Arab Peace Initiative, relevant UN resolutions, and we also point to the principles outlined in the New York Declaration. We believe that true and lasting stability cannot be achieved without a fully sovereign, independent, democratic Palestinian state living side by side with the State of Israel in peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. We would like to acknowledge the presence of the representatives of Israel, Palestine, and Algeria at this meeting this afternoon. Panama is also grateful for the briefings provided by Mr. Alakbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator, and also Mr. Mladenov, High Representative for Gaza of the Board of Peace. Both of those briefings provided us with a comprehensive vision of the situation in Gaza and the West Bank, which continues to evolve in a profoundly concerning direction. In the West Bank, we are seeing a sustained increase in violence, the displacement of communities, and continued demolitions, particularly in Area C, where limitations remain difficult for the Palestinian population. These measures are incompatible with the obligations stemming from Resolution 2334 from 2016, in particular the need to refrain from taking any measures that would alter the demographic composition, nature, and the status of the territory. If this trend continues, there is the risk that the minimum conditions necessary to move towards a fair, dignified, and sustainable solution to this conflict will continue to be eroded. In addition to this, we are now seeing regional tensions, including the continued attacks with missiles and drones against Israeli territory by Hezbollah and Iran, which are a dangerous escalation and only add more instability. Panama reiterates our call for there to be full restraint and for there to be no unilateral measures that could exacerbate the situation on the ground even further. President, the situation in Gaza reminds us that although the ceasefire has made it possible for us to see a relative reduction in the intensity of hostilities, violent activities continue. And this shows that the current efforts remain insufficient to bring full stability to the situation and to allow the people of Gaza to live in security and dignity. This reality has been exacerbated by a prolonged humanitarian crisis characterized by restrictions on access, the lack of essential provisions, and thousands of people who are still awaiting medical evacuation. Against this complex backdrop, it is critical to ensure the participation and full support of the United Nations system. Panama reiterates its full support to the work of UNRWA, OCHA, and other humanitarian agencies who continue to work in extremely complex conditions in their efforts to assist civilians. Their work is critical to meet people's basic needs and to uphold minimum conditions of human dignity. In this regard, we stress the critical need to ensure the full respect for humanitarian principles, as well as to protect the United Nations personnel and facilities. President, Panama welcomes the ongoing progress in measures to ensure the stabilization and reconstruction of Gaza, in line with the framework that was supported by this Council through Resolution 2803 of last year, including those efforts made through the Board of Peace, with the active participation of the United Nations system and countries from the region. In order for this progress to be sustainable, it will be critical for them to go hand in hand with security conditions for the people of Israel and Palestine. This means addressing effectively the security dimension in a broad sense, encompassing both arms control and fundamental needs, including fighting hunger, strengthening the health system, and ensuring access to education. These measures are critical to improve people's living conditions and to pave more robust foundations for a lasting stability, ensuring at the same time that we avoid conditions that could lead to new expressions of extremism and violence. In this regard, Panama reiterates that Hamas must be disarmed and cannot play any role whatsoever in the future of Gaza. It will also be critical to move forward in a process of governance that makes it possible for there to be an orderly transition towards a unified and reformed Palestinian leadership, which can meet its people's needs and contribute to the security both of their own people and their neighbors. This process should also make it possible to strengthen the economic and financial sustainability of Palestinian institutions, which is critical to achieve comprehensive stability. President, Panama reiterates that the only viable, sustainable option remains that through negotiations to allow the peoples showing political will on both sides. These negotiations must be serious and must allow the people of Israel and Palestine to live side by side in peace, security and dignity within secure and internationally recognized borders in line with international law and the relevant resolutions of this Security Council. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alec Barra for his briefing on the Secretary General's report. And I wish to thank High Representative Mladenov for his presence here today and for his detailed briefing on the way ahead. This is exactly what we need as a Council. Mr. President, for decades, this Council has convened to bring a lasting and peaceful solution to the Palestinian question. Throughout this time, while the situation on the ground has evolved, one constant has remained, that the only viable solution to this decades-long conflict is the realization of a two-state solution. We're determined not to let it slip beyond reach, but it is unfortunately what is happening right in front of us. Mr. President, we continue to support a full implementation of the ceasefire in Gaza. Resolution 2803 has charted a way forward. It provides a clear framework. Phase 1 has been completed, but we need to see tangible progress on the implementation of Phase 2. We need progress on lifting the restrictions on humanitarian aid, including entry on dual-use items, on the removal of rubble and unexploded ordnance, on rebuilding of homes and of reopening of schools. We also need progress on the disarmament of Hamas, Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and a viable path towards Palestinian self-determination. Sadly, progress is not happening fast enough. Devastation is still immense in Gaza. Parents, lacking food, are turning to burning plastic to cook food for their children. Injured and sick people are still await evacuation and medicine, and the health system has collapsed, as we heard from the High Representative. There's a lack of all necessities. The regional escalation has deteriorated the situation further. All border crossings except Kerem Shalom have been closed for humanitarian aid, and Rafah only reopened recently for a limited number of evacuations and returnees. The number of trucks with humanitarian aid entering Gaza has fallen to fewer than 100 per day, at a time when humanitarian access should be safe, sustained, and unhindered to meet the vast needs in Gaza. This is well below the target of 600 trucks per day envisioned in the peace plan. The ones who could deliver the much-needed aid are prevented from doing so. The UN-led humanitarian system, which includes UNRWA and international NGOs, has proven its ability to deliver aid at scale, efficiently and safely. It remains the best place to carry out this enormous task, but it is prevented from doing so. We call on Israel to urgently re-register international NGOs and to remove all barriers for the effective delivery of humanitarian aid. Mr. President, progress on the 20-point plan is clearly linked to the situation in the West Bank. In the shadow of the regional escalation, and after 2 years of war in Gaza, following Hamas' brutal terror attack on October 7th, the international community risks losing sight of the situation in the West Bank. We must not allow that to happen. Across the West Bank, Israeli control is being solidified, settlement expansion continues to increase, outposts are being legalized under Israeli law, and Palestinian land is being seized. Communities face demolition and displacement. We reiterate that Israel's settlements are a clear violation of international law and call on Israel to change course. Since the beginning of the recent regional escalation, we've also seen a concerning uptick in settler violence. In just the first 3 months of 2026, 8 Palestinians have been killed by extremist settlers who continue to exercise violence with full impunity. This compares with 8 in all of 2025. And as documented by Israeli NGO Yesh Din, nearly 94% of the cases that were actually recorded by Israeli police concerning settler violence over 20 years were not brought to trial. The gap between the commitments of this Council and the reality on the ground is widening. This trajectory must be reversed. Settlement expansion must stop. Action that fragment Palestinian territory must be brought to an end, including the E1 settlement plan and the continued legalization of outposts. Withheld Palestinian tax revenues must be released. Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, must be reunified under the Palestinian Authority. Failing this would mean that a future Palestinian state becomes an illusion before long. Mr. President, Denmark will continue to call for a peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question, for progress towards a two-state solution, for a future of peace and security for Palestinians and Israelis alike. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank the Deputy Special Coordinator, Mr. Alakbarov, and the High Representative for Gaza of the Board of Peace, Mr. Mladenov, for their briefings. Your presence here, Mr. Mladenov, is very welcome, and we listened very carefully to your briefing. It's critical for the Council to be kept regularly informed about the work of the Board of Peace, which stems from Resolution 2803, which enshrines President Trump's peace plan. For a month now, the Middle East has been grappling with an unprecedented conflagration, and the situation in Palestine, be it in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, must remain something that the Council keeps an eye on. President, the situation in Gaza remains critical and demands the immediate implementation of the second phase of the peace plan. The ceasefire is to be welcomed, but it remains fragile. We must ensure that there is unhindered access for humanitarian aid. Israel must lift restrictions on the delivery of humanitarian aid and respect the privileges of the United Nations. Everything must also be done to ensure that there is a rapid deployment on the ground of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, and Hamas must be disarmed. Mr. Mladenov mentioned a sequenced plan in his briefing, support which the mediators have put forward. We call on Hamas to accept this plan. Any other choice would be suicidal for Palestine and the Palestinians, and we also call on Israel to accept these terms. Above and beyond this, it is reconstruction that is critical. Secondly, given the alarming acceleration in Israeli settlement building in the West Bank, which harms the territorial continuity of the Palestinian state, this Council must act. The unprecedented multiplication of attacks by settlers against Palestinian civilians is unacceptable, and we strongly condemn them. We call on Israel to protect the Palestinians and to punish the perpetrators of these violent acts. The unhindered acceleration of settlement building is also concerning. Israeli decisions to extend Israeli control over the West Bank are blatant violations of international law. We reiterate our condemnation of settlement building and our opposition to any form of annexation of the West Bank. Thirdly, the weakening of the Palestinian Authority, notably by the unjustifiable refusal to provide tax income, is dangerous. This only harms regional stability and the security of Israel. It undermines the capacity of the Palestinian Authority to provide essential services to the people. 4. France is also working specifically in the humanitarian, security and political domains. First, France, last February, once again was able to work by delivering 80 tons of food aid to Gaza by working with the World Food Programme. In the security domain, France has also been working to strengthen Palestinian forces through the missions of the European Union, and France is also providing significant financial support. President, this Council has the responsibility to act and to show unity. Without any resolution to the conflict between Israel and Palestine, no security regional architecture will be viable. More than ever before, we must mobilize to preserve the two-state solution. It is the key of Israel's security and also the way to satisfy the legitimate rights of the people of Palestine. The Declaration of New York, which has been endorsed by the international community, must steer our work. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of the DRC.
Mr. President, the Democratic Republic of the Congo would like to thank Mr. Ramiz Alekbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, and Mr. Nikolai Mladenov, High Representative for Gaza. We thank them for their briefings. For peace and stability in the Middle East, the DRC remains deeply concerned by the recent developments in the occupied Palestinian territories, including West Bank and Gaza. They continue fueling tensions and undermining prospects for lasting peace. In this context, we call upon all the parties to display the utmost restraint, avoid any action that can worsen tensions, and promote dialogue as a key means towards lasting de-escalation. Mr. President, almost a decade after the adoption of Resolution 2334 by the Security Council, we must acknowledge that its provisions remain largely unimplemented. In this regard, we recall that compliance with the resolutions of the Security Council is a foundation for our credibility. We therefore call for parties to avoid any unilateral measure which can alter facts on the ground, make efforts for peace more complicated, but rather to undertake specific measures to reduce tensions, protect the civilians. Trust can only be re-established through tangible gestures and genuine commitment to dialogue. We therefore reaffirm the importance of upholding international law, including international humanitarian law. In the same vein, the DRC take notes of the current efforts under Resolution 2803 of 17th November 2025 aimed at ending the conflict in Gaza and encourages all parties to fully honor the commitments undertaken, in particular when it comes to maintaining the ceasefire and improving the conditions of the civilians. It is essential to make sure that there is safe, rapid and unimpeded humanitarian access and basic services are provided. My delegation also takes note of initiatives aimed at supporting transitional governance and reconstruction in Gaza, and we welcome, therefore, the nomination of Mr. Nikolai Mladenov, High Representative of the Board of Peace to Gaza. In this context, we underscore the importance of a transparent, inclusive and coordinated implementation of these efforts so as to create the conditions which are conducive towards lasting stability. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation remains worrying. Given this, the Democratic Republic of the Congo would like to underscore the indispensable role played by the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. They are a central pillar of the humanitarian response. Their work is essential to provide vital assistance, in particular in such areas as health, education, and emergency assistance. Mr. President, the Democratic Republic of the Congo would like to reaffirm its commitment to a negotiated solution. To ensure the viability of such approach, we would like to put forth the following elements. First, the importance of confidence-building measures, progressive ones, between the parties, including in the humanitarian and economic areas, so as to create an environment which is conducive towards a resumption of dialogue. Second, the need to have a renewed and coordinated commitment of the international community to accompany de-escalation efforts in support to the existing United Nations mechanism. Mr. President, by way of conclusion, I would like to say that we think that the current period requires that we go beyond simple declarations of principles and move to specific actions, that we have pragmatic and sustained efforts to restore trust and give new impetus to political process so as to end up with lasting peace for the benefit of all peoples in the region. The DRC stands ready to support any and all initiative to promote a constructive and inclusive dialogue geared towards a just and lasting peace in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative from the DRC for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Ramiz Alakbarov for his informative briefing, and I welcome the High Representative for Gaza, Nikolai Mladenov, to this meeting, and I thank him for his valuable and comprehensive contribution. Mr. President, the escalation in the Middle East has an immediate impact on the civilian populations in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, where civilians are experiencing increased violence, movement restrictions, and rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation. In the West Bank, rising settler violence and the IDF military activity continue to inflict suffering upon the Palestinian population. It has resulted in tens of thousands of Palestinians being forcibly displaced. According to OCHA reports, over the last 2.5 years, 1,071 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank, including at least 273 children. More than 30 Palestinians have been killed by violent settlers, and none of them has been held accountable to this date. Over the past 2 years, 42 Israeli civilians and 26 security forces were killed. The deteriorating situation fuels tensions and perpetuates a cycle of violence, exposing both Palestinians and Israelis to ever-increasing security risks. And we call on Israeli authorities to take immediate and effective action to prevent further attacks against Palestinian civilians and to ensure accountability. We also call on the Palestinian Authority to implement its reform agenda, including the reform of school curriculum, and to address concerns about the continuation of policy rewarding violent acts. The ongoing settlement policy, including the recent decisions to expand Israel's control over the West Bank and East Jerusalem, undermines the prospects for long-term peace. We therefore once again call for full respect of international law and the implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2334. Mr. President, while the escalation in the West Bank is in the focus, we also have to address the still tragic situation in Gaza. The unimpeded access of humanitarian assistance to the civilian population must be ensured in Gaza and the West Bank at scale, in accordance with international humanitarian law. Predictable and unimpeded flow of goods, in particular for essential supplies, must be ensured to deliver the support that is so desperately needed. And we commend the vital work of the UN agencies and international humanitarian partners and stress the importance of enabling them to work independently and impartially. And we note the recent reopening of the Rafah crossing. It is important to keep the crossing points open to alleviate severe medical shortages in Gaza and allow people to acquire medical treatment abroad. The reconstruction of Gaza is closely linked to security and governance, as we heard from the High Representative Mladenov today. Rearming of Hamas may not take place in Gaza. We cannot allow Hamas to hijack neither the Palestinian cause nor the implementation of Gaza peace plan. Hamas must disarm and relinquish power. And the people of Israel deserve to live in peace and security without daily threat of terrorism. Tangible restoration of living conditions in Gaza are urgently needed to create a social and political environment conducive to a reunited Palestinian Authority's governance. The comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict, put forward by President Trump and endorsed by the Security Council Resolution 2803, remains at the core of the ongoing international efforts to achieve peace and stability in Gaza. And we look forward to its full implementation. And we welcome the Board of Peace announcements in February on the commitments to deploy troops to the UN-authorized stabilization force, as well as on the indispensable financial pledges for the early recovery and reconstruction in Gaza. The National Committee for the Administration of Gaza should be empowered with the necessary means, tools, and access to accomplish its mandate. Early involvement of the Palestinian Authority would lay the foundation of future self-sustaining governance in Gaza. In conclusion, Mr. President, the security situation in the Middle East as a whole is highly concerning. The brutal aggression of Iran against the countries in the region and beyond, instrumentalizing proxies such as Hezbollah escalatory attacks, have dragged the whole region into a wave of violence. Iran's actions severely undermine peace and maritime security and are causing a global trade and energy crisis. Iranian attacks are directly enabled by Russia. Despite the current turmoil in the region, it is important to prevent the resumption of hostilities in Gaza and the ongoing international efforts to achieve lasting peace and security in the Middle East must not lose sight of a political perspective that addresses the security concerns and legitimate aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians. A just and lasting peace requires treating Gaza and the West Bank as a unified entity. And we reiterate that a negotiated two-state solution in accordance with internationally agreed parameters as defined by the Security Council resolutions and the New York Declaration remains the only viable path to a lasting peace. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you really for convening this briefing. We begin by appreciating the important updates provided by the Deputy Special Coordinator and the High Representative of the Board of Peace for Gaza. We also wish to acknowledge the efforts of those working often under immense strain, as we have heard, for peace and to respond to the human suffering on the ground. Mr. President, despite our best impulses not to do so, today, as we have been asked, especially by the High Representative of the Board of Peace for Gaza, we dare to look ahead with hope. We meet at a moment that calls not for repetition, but for clarity. At its core, this situation is not only political, it is human. It is about dignity under pressure, survival under uncertainty, and hope under strain. The principles that must guide us don't seem or shouldn't be complicated. Civilians must be protected. The two-state solution has to be seen and must remain the only enduring path to true and sustainable peace. Trust must be rebuilt. Humanitarian access must be ensured. Armed factions and non-state actors must be disarmed. Expansion of settlements must end. Violence, and that part of the world has had and continues to see enough of it, must and cannot be normalized. These are not positions of convenience. For all of us and everything we have heard, they must represent obligations of conscience. Mr. President, today we speak from experience and the painful memory of having endured conflict ourselves. We know that societies can collapse in an instant, but takes generations to rebuild. We know that agreements without trust cannot and will not endure. And we know that true recovery requires healing, not just institutions, but people. These are not abstract reflections. They are lessons written into our own history, our own experiences. And yet we have learned an even harder truth. Humanitarian relief can sustain life, but only genuine political settlement can restore it. Relief keeps people alive, but only peace, real, negotiated, inclusive peace, allows them to live with dignity. This is why the absence of violence, as we continue to now see, must never be mistaken for the presence of peace. The responsibility before this Council is not only to respond, and we must respond to the asks put before us by the High Representative for Gaza, but we also have a duty to remain consistent. Consistency in upholding international law. Consistency in protecting civilians. Consistency in keeping space open for dialogue, even when progress is slow, imperfect, or, as we have heard, fragile. Because what is imperfect today can and may become essential tomorrow if we do not abandon it. Liberia therefore supports efforts that reduce suffering, build confidence, and create the conditions in which political solutions can begin to truly take root. We say this not because it is easy, and as we have heard, but we say it because they are necessary for peace. Mr. President, allow me to conclude with 3 reflections drawn from Liberia's own journey. We sit around this table as proof that recovery is possible when the world refuses to look away. Peace is not the absence of struggle. It is the triumph of humanity over the impulses that once divided us, however difficult it may seem. And finally, this has been a long, drawn-up conflict. We have refused today to take the path of recounting all the statistics because they are available to each of us to see. We do not want to bore you with the tragedy that we see and know of that's happening in that prolonged conflict. So we spare you that. But we have one ask. Our tenure here is only for 2 years. This conflict, hopefully, should not outdate us in its current state and form. May we be the generation that answered suffering with solidarity and despair with the discipline of hope. That is the responsibility before us today. And that is the standard by which we must and will be remembered. Each of us around this table, let us try to end this. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Liberia for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we would like to thank the Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov. We thank him for a detailed report on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories in the context of Security Council Resolution 2334. And we thank the High Representative for Gaza, Nikolai Mladenov, for his briefing. Well, the entire world is horrified by the aggression against Iran unleashed by the United States and Israel, which provoked a destabilization in the Middle East and the world markets. What is being undeservedly obscured is a deteriorating situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and, in particular, in the West Bank. Making use of the regional escalation, the Israeli settlers redoubled their efforts in infringing upon the rights of the Palestinians on the West Bank. Since the beginning of the war, there was an 80% increase in the crossings of roads and checkpoints. Additional military contingents have been introduced to Palestinian lands. Local people and municipalities saw 40 hectares of land confiscated for military needs. Since the beginning of the year, the settlers pushed out 1.5 thousand people from the West Bank. As a result of what was being done by radicals and security forces, 29 Palestinians were killed. We're particularly concerned by the growing amount of weapons and weapon permits issued to the settlers on the West Bank and in East Jerusalem under the pretext of ensuring security. This leads to further escalation of the situation. Israel has increased the pace of settlement constructions and broadened the practice of the seizure of plots within the framework of the policy of creating irreversible facts on the ground. Unprecedented decisions were made as regards the construction of the E1 region and to review the legal status of the A area and B area in violation of the Oslo agreements, which were signed and ratified by Israel. As a result of this, as a result of the Israeli operation, the Iron Wall, more than 33,000 Palestinian refugees were evicted from the camps in Jenin, Tulkarm, and Nur Shams. Half of the buildings there were demolished, and this brings into question the return of the Palestinians there in future. What is openly provocative is the closing of the Al-Aqsa mosque compound for the Muslims in the last days of Ramadan on the pretext of security, and this became a new ordeal for the faithful. Also, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is closed to the believers. We call on Israel to safeguard the historic and legal status of the holy sites in Jerusalem. Against this background, what we see is the hate speech blooming actively. The accounts related to radicals in social services call upon people not to miss the opportunity whilst the attention of the international community is diverted to Iran. The deputy mayor of Jerusalem, in a video clip against the background of a demolition of an UNRWA building, directly calls for the murder of all agency staff, and he is using the pretext of his religious views for that. We categorically condemn such a statement and call on Israeli authorities to undertake all measures necessary to make sure that this does not happen again. Unfortunately, such statements are not an exception. It's just one of the examples of an aggressive and targeted campaign deployed by Israel against UNRWA. Since the 7th of October 2023, 391 UNRWA staff was killed. Agency buildings are being demolished. A law is passed aimed at closing UN schools and hospitals. There are electricity and water cuts. Anti-UNRWA disinformation is being launched in the media. Despite all of that, UNRWA continues being the only body in providing comprehensive assistance to Palestinians and the occupied Palestinian territories and in the neighboring Arab states. The agency provides shelters for refugees, medical assistance, provides educational services, helps with basic necessities and food. The mandate of the agency is particularly important in the generally recognized international legal basis for the settlement of the Middle East, first and foremost in making sure that the Palestinians have their rights prior to their return. And we note that many of the agency staff paid the highest price during the years of the war in Gaza. We support the efforts by the leadership of UNRWA, including the outgoing Commissioner General Lazzarini, and call upon donors to continue extending whatever assistance they can to the agency, whose representatives in the recent briefing acknowledged that even the regional escalation is less of a factor for UNRWA, less than their worsening financial situation. Mr. President, At the same time, the Gaza Strip is once again on the brink of catastrophe. Since the moment the notional ceasefire in Gaza was announced, 10th of October last year, that is, more than 650 Palestinians were killed and about 1,700 wounded. The yellow line is gradually moving west, and the territory which is not under Israeli control is shrinking. According to the information we have, the amount of humanitarian assistance has gone down by 80 to 90%. There is only one crossing point. Kerem Shalom is fully functioning. The Rafah crossing was partly restored recently for people's crossing. We're also witnessing that there are shortages of drinking water and food and medicines. And the prospects for the rapid restoring of civilian infrastructure are not there. Israel is blocking the supplies of construction materials. We call upon Western Jerusalem to ensure a safe and unimpeded access in line with the well-known guidelines. Overall, we must acknowledge that the implementation of the peace plan by Trump on Gaza, endorsed by Security Council Resolution 2803, is not something that we're witnessing. We understand, of course, that the regional escalation is not conducive towards creating favorable conditions for future stops so as to deploy transitional structures in the Strip and the formation of international stabilization forces in Gaza. At the same time, the lack of progress in the implementation of the plan, including the lack of understanding on the ISF, on the withdrawal of Israeli military from the Strip and the transfer of authorities to the Palestinian authorities, can lead to yet another spiral of hostilities. We are disappointed and perplexed by the fact that Ramallah is excluded from the political settlement process. Their representatives were not invited to participate in the Board of Peace. Or we also wonder about steps against the Palestinian authorities, such as the withholding by Israel of the clearance revenues to the tune of $4.5 billion. All of this undermines American peace efforts. We call upon mediators to do everything they can so as to find a negotiated solution, the kind of solution that takes into account the interests of all parties. Mr. President, the position of Russia on the Palestine-Israeli settlement is of principled nature and is not subject to short-term changes. We advocate the resumption of the peace process on a generally recognized international legal basis, including the two-state solution, with the goal of creating an independent and viable state of Palestine within the 1967 border and the capital in East Jerusalem, coexisting in peace and security with Israel. As regards a regional escalation, here we call on parties to immediately cease hostilities. Russia is ready to assist in finding ways to resolve the current escalation and to do it via political and diplomatic means. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
I thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator Ramiz Alakbarov for his thorough briefing, and I welcome the High Representative for Gaza of the Board of Peace, Nikolai Mladenov, to today's meeting, and I thank him for his very clear messages on the way ahead. Turmoil has once again engulfed the Middle East, with Lebanon and the Gulf states being the starkest examples of the current conflict's spillover. Our unwavering support and solidarity goes toward Lebanon and the GCC countries. The severity of the situation notwithstanding, we cannot afford to divert our focus from the Palestinian question, which requires our continued vigilance and attention. Madam President, Greece was among the first to support the comprehensive plan for Gaza, endorsed by the Security Council Resolution 2803, because we believed that the 20-point plan was the only way to stop the catastrophe. And we see the implementation of the first phase of the plan has already yielded significant results. It allowed for the release of the Israeli hostages, for a ceasefire which must be consolidated and sustained, as well as for the humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza once more. It is imperative now that we collectively follow through on its implementation. Hamas and armed groups must urgently and fully disarm, and I welcome Mr. Mladenov's calling on full decommissioning. Humanitarian aid at scale must increase, and the implementation of early recovery projects in the entire Gaza Strip must follow. On this point, I wish to highlight the added value of initiatives such as the Cyprus Maritime Humanitarian Corridor, as well as the indispensable role of UNRWA. Reconstruction projects at a later stage should be clearly embedded in a political horizon leading to a two-state solution. Governance arrangements in Gaza must be legitimate, durable, and ensuring full Palestinian ownership. Having welcomed the nomination of a Palestinian National Committee for the administration of Gaza, we stress that any transitional framework must ultimately lead to a strengthening of the role of the Palestinian Authority. The PA is the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Authorizing the International Stabilization Force and defining its operational mandate is another milestone along our path. In the midst of rising challenges and additional restraints imposed on the flow of the humanitarian aid, we welcome the reopening of the Rafah crossing, even though partly restored, and the deployment of the UBAM Rafah mission. We encourage the full reopening of additional crossings which can greatly facilitate humanitarian access. Greece will allocate a substantial financial contribution towards hospital units in East Jerusalem through the PIGAS EU mechanism. Madam President, let me turn to the deteriorating situation in the West Bank, as it is cause of grave concern. We oppose any plans to increase control over the annexed parts of the West Bank. These include the construction of new settler units, especially in the E1 area, land confiscation, demolition of Palestinian homes, and forcible displacement of civilian populations. Such actions run against international law, contravene Resolution 2334, and undermine the prospects of a negotiated two-state solution. We strongly condemn the increasing and unprecedented settler violence targeting the Palestinian population, including Christian communities. The damage provoked by settler violence is also recognized by senior Israeli security officials. Civilians must be protected at all times and in accordance with international humanitarian law. The fact that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Al-Aqsa Mosque remain inaccessible is highly concerning, and this in view of major religious festivities as the recent Eid al-Fitr and the upcoming Easter celebrations. The preservation and respect of the status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem is of paramount importance. As our Foreign Minister has stressed, Gaza and the West Bank are a single, indivisible territorial unit for a future Palestine state. An empowered and reformed Palestinian Authority would be a credible partner for peace. We acknowledge the PA's ongoing reform efforts, including the drafting of a Palestinian constitution. A fiscal collapse of the Palestinian Authority would have direct consequences reaching well beyond the West Bank and must be avoided at all costs. We therefore repeat our call for the release of its withheld tax revenues. In closing, Mr. President, the Middle East peace question can only be resolved through dialogue and diplomacy. Greece will remain committed to a negotiated, just and lasting peace based on the two-state solution, the New York Declaration, and the relevant UNSC resolutions. Towards realizing a vision where Israel and a viable and sovereign Palestine coexist side by side in peace, mutual recognition, and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank the Special Coordinator, Mr. Alakbarov, and the High Representative for Gaza, Mr. Mladenov. I'd like to thank them both for their briefings. I also welcome those delegations who are taking part in this meeting. In the midst of the serious escalation of violence that the region has been suffering for 24 days, the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory continues to deteriorate. In the Gaza Strip, the IDF have killed 631 Palestinians since the beginning of the ceasefire that was agreed upon in October. The delivery of humanitarian aid continues to be limited, and restrictions on the work of UNRWA and that of more than 37 other humanitarian organizations is continuing. In addition, hunger, the cold weather conditions and diseases, a direct result of the conditions imposed by Israel as collective punishment against the Palestinians, have claimed hundreds more lives in Gaza. But Israel is doubling down on its illegal occupation in the West Bank through a systematic campaign of organized violence. In complete disdain for the provisions of the ICJ and this Council, including Resolution 2334, whose implementation we are considering today, Israel nevertheless continues to consolidate its de facto annexation. This year alone, more than 1,500 Palestinians have been displaced in the West Bank. Restrictions on the freedom of movement for Palestinians have only intensified. Demolitions and evictions have become a day-to-day practice. The Palestinian economy is on the verge of collapse. Incitement to hate and violence from the very highest levels of Israeli politics seem to have become consistent discourse. This hate speech has led to an alarming escalation in pogroms that we have seen over the last 4 days throughout the entire West Bank. These facts are not isolated or spontaneous incidents. They show a deliberate policy by the Israeli authorities towards focusing on displacement and ethnic cleansing. This is something that has been found through evidence in UN reports. President, Colombia is paying attention to the developments of the implementation of the Gaza Peace Plan and Resolution 2803. Although my delegation does recognize that some progress has been made, the reality on the ground remains a matter of concern. After more than 5 months, the ceasefire is increasingly fragile. Aid is not getting in at the necessary scale. Reconstruction has not begun. The National Committee for the Administration of Gaza is facing headwinds, and the Palestinian people's right to self-determination seems to be an increasingly distant promise. Against this backdrop, Colombia wishes to reiterate 4 fundamental principles that should guide the implementation of Resolution 2803. First of all, the centrality of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. Secondly, the inadmissibility of any demographic or territorial change. 3, rejection of any form of apartheid, protectorate, or external governance. And fourth, the need immediately to begin the reconstruction efforts without any conditions. President, the war that Israel has unleashed in the Middle East is one step further in the genocide against the Palestinian people. While the international community is alarmed to see how this conflict is developing, which undermines international peace and security, Netanyahu's regime continues their campaign of forced displacement and ethnic cleansing. It is absurd to think that there can be a fair, sustainable peace while the genocidal project continues, which threatens the stability of the region. Going back towards the law of the strongest will not make the world safer for anyone. On the contrary, it will only perpetuate cycles of violence for decades. The only possible way out is to end the occupation and to implement the two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side within the recognized borders, fully respecting the political independence and territorial integrity of the State of Palestine and those of Israel and all countries of the region. In this context, Colombia calls upon this Council and the United Nations to promote, without delay, an inclusive process of dialogue that can bring about a comprehensive, fair, and sustainable political solution in the Middle East. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Colombia for her statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United States. And I want, in that regard, to thank you, Deputy Special Coordinator Al-Akbarov and High Representative Mladinov for your briefings today. We are very and genuinely grateful for your partnership and for your candor before this council. Colleagues, President Trump's 20-point comprehensive peace plan to end the Gaza conflict has charted the way forward for all of us who long for peace in the Middle East. And as we said as we were negotiating Resolution 2803, we have two choices. Choice one, Hamas continues to rain its terror on the Palestinian people of Gaza and export its terror for more October 7ths, as it repeatedly pledged to do. That's choice one. Choice two is the IDF continues to defend itself and occupy Gaza, or we chart a new way forward together. At Resolution 2803, which I'll remind everyone was unopposed in this council, that then set forth the Board of Peace, the International Stabilization Force, the National Committee on the Administration of Gaza, the funding mechanisms to pay for those operations and reconstructions. That is the answer that your people and the American people have hoped for, a stable, safe, and prosperous region so that we do not pass this cycle of violence, the status quo that has led us nowhere, on to the next generation. So the U.S. and our partners have made substantial progress leading the implementation of Resolution 2803 since it was adopted in November. Over the last 5 months, humanitarian assistance has surged into Gaza, and every single Israeli hostage, both living and sadly deceased, has returned home. And for the first time in many, many years, Hamas no longer holds hostages in its terror tunnels. Together with Israel and our partner nations, and I'll point out that we have over 30 countries, plus the world's humanitarian implementers, coordinating with us in the Civil Military Coordination Center. And through that coordination, we have enabled the entry of over 4,000 trucks of humanitarian and other critical goods each week for the past 16 weeks. Yes, those numbers have reduced recently, but we should not ignore in this council the incredible amount of assistance that has moved into Gaza. Food assistance reached 2.1 million people in January, which is 100% of the population. The Rafah crossing reopened. The Allenby Bridge and and Hussein Bridge also reopened Important lifelines for medical evacuations restarted. Absolutely more work is needed. We have a long way to go. Those who live in the region need cleaner, more durable housing and health services. And we are working daily with our Israeli counterparts and other partners across this body to strengthen humanitarian access into and inside of Gaza. I will remind this council, I'll remind colleagues that the terror tunnels, Hamas's terror tunnels, miles and miles and miles of them, were built with the concrete, with the steel, with the other construction materials that could have and should have been used to improve the lives of Gazans. But instead, Hamas chose to use those then dual-use items to terrorize its own people and to conduct the October 7th attacks. Nonetheless, last month, during the inaugural meeting of the Board of Peace, President Trump announced that Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Uzbekistan, and Qatar pledged more than $7 billion in support. That is an incredible sum. It eclipses almost anything else we've seen in the world for this effort. More than 40 delegations attended to offer their support to bring peace and prosperity to the people of Gaza. This is real money, real effort towards a better life for Gazans. And I want to thank, on behalf of the United States, behalf of the President, I want to thank these countries for their commitment. They're doing much more than issuing speeches or statements or statements along the lines of what should be done. They're contributing real effort, real money, and it will enable the Board of Peace and the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, the NCAG, to keep working hard on its objectives, a better future for Gaza and a lasting peace. Gaza's reconstruction and its future require our collective efforts. And your leadership that illustrates a simple, hopeful truth. It should serve as a model for all member states intent on peace. It should serve as a model for bold leadership that can play a meaningful role in forging peace and security. A key leader now amongst us, Dr. Ali Sheikh, at the NCAG, is laying the groundwork to restore Gaza's core public services and rebuild its civil institutions. His mandate is enormous. It is to make Gaza great. And as the NCAG begins its work, including overseeing the recruitment and training of thousands and thousands of Gazan police forces that are free of Hamas, and we cannot understate the overwhelming response, as Mr. Mladenov briefed today, of Gazans who are willing to restore the rule of law for its own people. The response has been tremendous. And under the oversight of the Board of Peace, the NCAG will position Gaza's economy for long-term success. We have to move Gaza beyond 100% dependency on aid. We know that with this plan, if we can all come together to implement it, that Gaza can become a destination for investment and real growth and change this culture of dependency and this absolute dependency on humanitarian aid that it currently endures. So all of this tremendous progress compared to 6 months ago. 6 months ago, when we were at this council demanding a ceasefire, demanding the return of hostages, demanding access of humanitarian aid, demanding a restoration of services, have we made the progress as quickly as some have demanded here in their speeches today? No. But have we made tremendous progress compared to where we were just a few months ago? Absolutely. And I would hope that back in our capitals and here in this body, we could recognize this. So here's another hard truth. The future of Gaza and Dr. Shaith's work and the NCAG's work is entirely dependent now on Hamas decommissioning its weapons. The Palestinians of Gaza must be freed from the butchers and barbarians that have long oppressed them with guns and drones and bombs and tunnels. Colleagues, we truly stand at an inflection point now. I've outlined the progress that we've made, but this is the obstacle. And we are calling on the international community to unite, to recognize Hamas for the terrorist group that it is, to pressure Hamas and aid the Board of Peace and support these entities that we have now, as a body, endorsed to put in place and to become partners in disarming Hamas. It's now or never. The president has said, President Trump has said, that Hamas will disarm one way or another. They will do it the easy way or they will do it the hard way. Let's work together, collectively, to push Hamas to do the right thing and take a step towards a brighter future. High Commissioner Mladenov just laid out the principles and the framework for a decommissioning plan and for the demilitarization of Gaza. I hope we will hear public support for this plan endorsed by the mediators from your capitals and from your countries going forward. It is the only way forward. And when we realize that future, when Hamas lays down its arms, we can see the people of Gaza pick up shovels and construction equipment and the things necessary to finally begin rebuilding and to build a future for Gaza that is unrivaled in history. Council members, we must seize this moment for what it is. Pressure Hamas to immediately disarm for the sake of lasting peace. Anything short of that mark, the full demilitarization of Gaza, undermines Gaza's recovery, it undermines Israel's security, and it undermines the stability for the region. And to that end, I would like to remind everyone in this chamber that the American people care for stability and prosperity in Gaza and in the West Bank as well. President Trump has been clear. The United States is opposed to annexation of the West Bank, period. Colleagues, let us all give our full support to the institutions established by this committee, to the Board of Peace, to the International Stabilization Force, and to the NCAG to ensure the swift and successful triumph of President Trump's comprehensive plan for the sake of your children and mine. I thank you. I return to my duties as President of the Council, and I give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine. Excuse me.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council and to commend your personal engagement in addressing the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Allow me also to express our appreciation to Mr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov for his relentless efforts and for the UN's critical role on the ground, as well as for delivering the report of the Secretary General pursuant to the key UN Security Council Resolution 2334, which is the subject of our discussion today. Allow me also to thank Mr. Nikolai Mladenov, a person that I knew for a long time, and we worked together for a long time, as he said, in different capacities, for his briefing and his efforts. And we, the State of Palestine, look forward to working closely with him in addressing the dramatic situation still prevailing in the Gaza Strip, including through the newly established liaison office between the Palestinian National Authority, and the Board of Peace. They are waiting for you to begin the practical step for collaboration in this regard. Mr. President, Palestinian lives are not expendable and Palestinian land is not for grabs. On Saturday, 14th March, Wa'ad Bani Ode, a 35 years old mother, made breakfast for Uthman, a special needs child who was born blind. As the month of Ramadan was coming to an end, Khalid and his brothers, Mustafa and Muhammad, got up in the morning and played with a cell phone. Their father Ali had planned to spend time with his wife and children until after the Eid al-Fitr that started that weekend before returning to work in Israel. The whole family gathered around a play with Lego in the afternoon. Wa'ad prepared iftar. Father and sons went to the mosque for the evening prayers. That night, they decided to head to Nablus, where they went to a shopping mall ahead of the Eid to buy clothes for the children. To head to Nablus from Tammun, some of you refer to that town close to Jenin. They ate some ice cream and headed home. That is when the Eid preparations outing turned into tragedy. The car came under heavy fire, 50 to 70 rounds of bullets by an undercover Israeli force. No warning, no justification. Just another episode in a relentless killing spree, sparing no one in cities and villages across the West Bank. Uthman, the 7-year-old blind boy, was sitting in his mother's lap in the front. They were both killed instantly. The father, Ali, would have the time to pronounce a prayer before dying. Muhammad, the 5-year-old, will also be found dead in the car. Khalid, 11, stepped out of the car only to be grabbed and knocked down to the ground by the Israeli occupation forces, who were celebrating and saying, quote, "We killed the dogs," end of quotation. Khalid asked the soldier, "Do you love your father and mother?" The soldier said yes. So Khalid asked him, "Then why did you kill mine?" The soldier answered with a punch to his face. Khalid's brother Mustafa, 8 years old, survived with a wound by sharp nail that struck his face below his right eye. A mother, a father, and their 2 sons killed and their other 2 sons survived, traumatized for life, and not a single Israeli soldier was summoned for interrogation or accountability. A pattern not of impunity, but of shielding, promoting, and rewarding criminality. This past November, officers from the same unit were filmed executing 2 Palestinians in the West Bank city of Jenin after they had surrendered. The following day, extremist National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir announced he would promote the unit's commander. But Ben-Gvir is not the exception. This is a trend endorsed by the Israeli government as a whole. Israel's military has dropped the charges of 5 soldiers responsible for the violent rape of a Palestinian man in custody and set Timan in a notorious and nefarious case. The rape was filmed and the recording leaked by the chief military prosecutor. In Israel, there was a strong controversy over the leak and far less over the horrific rape itself. In a statement, the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, welcomed a decision by the military's top prosecutors to drop the charges, declaring, and I quote, "Justice has been served." Smotrich declared, and I quote, "IDF fighters are the bravest and most moral warriors," end of quotation. This was obvious for anyone who had seen the recording and the cowardly and vile act of raping a Palestinian prisoner. Netanyahu himself declared, and I quote, "It is unacceptable that it took so long to close the criminally conducted case against IDF fighters who are confronting the worst of our enemies," end of quotation. And he added, "The state of Israel must prosecute its enemies, not its heroic fighters." Indeed, what a display of heroism. State condoned rape as a weapon of war. Indiscriminate violence, the killing of entire families, a shoot-to-kill policy against innocent civilians, against children, shot in the head or in the chest, wanton destruction, rape and sexual assault, all these horrors that Gaza witnessed are more and more prevailing in Israeli prisons, where over 350 Palestinian children are held, and in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Terrifying violence, unhinged, unleashed by Israeli occupation forces and Israeli settlers. As we speak, settlers are spreading terror across communities throughout the West Bank, setting houses and trees ablaze, killing and wounding and beating Palestinians. They are terrorizing Palestinian communities to uproot them. Their attacks are a direct result of state-sponsored violence, incitement and impunity, and will not be possible without the complicity of Israeli occupation forces and the Israeli government. Without, as many of you have said, without accountability, these attacks will continue. There is no distinction between the project of the Israeli government and the project of Israeli settlers. They are one and the same. Annexation of Palestinian land, displacement of the Palestinian people. Annexation is underway despite worldwide condemnation by all of you, by President Trump, and the clear opposition expressed again by President Trump in this regard. It has accelerated through the legislative and administrative measures adopted recently by Israel. It is evident on the ground. We all agree here that annexation threatens all prospects and efforts for peace in our region. Annexation is a breach of the UN Charter, of the resolutions of this Council, of the most fundamental rules of international law. Over 100 states and organizations have opposed just outside this chamber these measures towards annexation. Council members have spoken out against it, and yet it is underway. Worldwide condemnation must translate into resolute action to stop it, and stop it now. Mr. President, addressing the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza would take years if there was no blockade and no closure given the mass indiscriminate bombardments that left so many killed and wounded and amputated and displaced and traumatized, and that left in the entire Gaza Strip in ruins. It cannot be addressed while the killing continues and severe restrictions on movement and access continue to be implemented, including measures against the UN and humanitarian organizations and their vital work. The Israeli blockade is compromising humanitarian and relief operations, removal of debris, the provisions of desperately needed shelters and of aid. We must move in parallel and without delay towards relief, recovery, and reconstruction in the Gaza Strip, and towards reunifying the West Bank and the Gaza Strip under the Palestinian Authority with one government, one law, one gun. It is precisely to facilitate annexation and forced displacement and to destroy Palestinian presence and statehood that Israel is targeting both communities and the Palestinian Authority itself. It is attacking it militarily, politically, and financially by stealing the tax revenues, which many of you have referred to. The Israeli Minister of Finance, Smotrich, in charge of the OPT, spelled it out in no unclear terms, and I quote, "We are going to collapse the authority of evil and terror called the Palestinian Authority." End of quotation. Israel must abandon its plans to annex over half of Gaza and over half of the West Bank and to displace the Palestinian population. The Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, constitute a single territorial unit. It is Palestinian land. It is not for sale. It is not for grabs by anyone. It is ours. At the heart of the Trump peace plan, President Trump peace plan, there were a number of cardinal principles. No bloodshed, no starvation, no occupation, no annexation, no forcible displacement. Cardinal principles, which are great, that all support and should support, and Israel should restrain itself from doing so and respect this position by all of us, including President Trump. It is those principles that secured the very wide support from Palestine, the Arabs, and OIC countries, and the world for President Trump's peace efforts and plan. They must be upheld. We will continue working with the U.S. administration, regional and international partners to chart a path towards liberation for Palestine and peace for the region. Mr. President, for the first time this Ramadan and Eid worshippers were kept away from Al-Haram al-Sharif and from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in yet another blatant breach of the historic status quo that has preserved religious rights and coexistence in Jerusalem, a city holy for the three monotheistic religions. There is no monopoly acceptable over the city of Jerusalem, no exclusivity, no exclusion that can be condoned. Billions of Christians, Muslims, and Jews have the right to have spiritual connection to Jerusalem, but those who own Jerusalem and the houses and the properties are the people of Jerusalem, are the Palestinian people. The Christian and Muslim Palestinians, sons and daughters of the Holy Land, must see their rights recognized and respected, and East Jerusalem is an integral part of the occupied Palestinian territory and of the Palestinian state. Mr. President, under the fog of the current war, Israel is intensifying its assault on our people. If there is one lesson that must be understood in the Middle East, it is that violence, dispossession, and displacement will never yield peace, Only freedom and justice will. Israel's colonial expansionist policies, annexation and occupation we are witnessing in Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria must be brought to an immediate end. The unity, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of our states must be respected. Civilians must be protected. International law must be respected. And since I am speaking of the current war, let me state that the same principles apply to it. The Palestinian leadership has called for a peaceful settlement of the conflict and de-escalation, and has condemned attacks by Iran against Arab and Muslim brotherly nations that are unjustified and unacceptable. Mr. President, this is about oppression, not religion. And the religious narrative used by Israel to justify the perpetuation of its colonial occupation and negation of Palestinian existence and rights will inflame the region. There is an urgent for de-radicalization, an end to incitement and hate speech by Israeli officials that is underlying the horrific attacks by Israeli occupation forces and settlers I described. The Palestinian people are entitled to freedom, like every country represented here, and all states should live side by side in peace and security within their internationally recognized borders, based on the UN Charter, international law, and the relevant UN resolutions. The Arab states have made a proposal for regional peace, the Arab Peace Initiative, and it should be heeded by all to transform our region, moving away from perpetual war towards sustainable peace and shared prosperity. This is the only way forward for our region and for the world. And I thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I would like to thank Mr. Alakbarov and Mr. Mladenov for the briefings and to wish you good luck in your important mission, Mr. Mladenov. Madam President, we have said it before and we will continue to say it. In Gaza, Hamas must be disarmed. They have not done so yet. Israel fully supports President Trump's 20-point peace plan and Security Council Resolution 2803, and we continue to meet our obligations under Phase 2. But that process cannot move forward while Hamas remains armed. And let me be clear, the fact that we are acting forcefully against Iran and Hezbollah does not mean we are any less focused on Gaza. It is the opposite. In Gaza, we are confronting the same radical extremist ideology, one that hides behind civilians, uses them as human shields, and turns homes, schools, and hospitals into instruments of war. It is the same fight, same tactics. For too long, we have dealt with the symptoms. Now we are dealing with the real source, with Iran. So let's be clear. This conflict with Iran did not start 3 weeks ago. It was built over decades. The Iranian regime armed proxies like Hamas, funded terror, and prepared for this moment. And now we are dismantling it. Together with our American allies, Israel has carried out over 8,500 strikes targeting missile launchers, weapons production facilities, and command centers. We have destroyed key elements of the regime's command structure. We have eliminated the figures driving this aggression. We tried diplomacy for years. You know that. This council invested in negotiations, dialogue, agreements, monitoring frameworks, and the regime exploited it, delaying, deceiving, and advancing its capabilities deep within underground mountains. It always claimed peaceful intent. It claimed it was not seeking nuclear weapons. Those claims have not matched its actions. Just a few weeks ago, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, was asked in an interview directly whether Iran has missiles with a range beyond 2,000 kilometers. He answered, and I quote him directly, not 2 years ago, a few weeks ago, and the direct quote, "We don't have those. We have intentionally kept the range of our missiles below 2,000 kilometers, so we don't have that capability. And we don't want to do that because we don't have any hostility against the United States people or Europeans whatsoever." That is what he told the world. And then last weekend, Iran launched missiles nearly 4,000 kilometers toward Diego Garcia, a remote island in the Indian Ocean that hosts a major joint US-UK military base. Double the range they claimed. That range reaches Paris, it reaches London, it reaches Athens, Copenhagen, Riga. Member of this council, your capitals are within reach. And if it has doubled once, it can double again, from 4,000 to 8,000 kilometers. That would make it capable of striking deep into the heart of the US. The regime has the capability, they have demonstrated it, and they are prepared to use it. No one is immune, no one is out of reach. Now they are trying to blackmail the international community. It will not work, and we cannot allow it to work. Today, these missiles carry conventional warheads. Imagine what they could do if they had nuclear ones. Madam President, there is a cost to this operation for Israelis, for our neighbors across the Gulf, and for the Iranian people. It is not a cost we ignore, but it is a cost we cannot afford to avoid because the threat we are facing is existential. For weeks, Israelis have lived in and out from bomb shelters, day after day, under Iranian missile fire. Just this weekend, Iranian missiles struck civilian areas in Arad and Dimona. This is the intent of the regime, to cause bloodshed, to kill, and to destroy our people. But it is not just targeting Jews. In Beit Awa, near Hebron, 4 Palestinian women were killed in a beauty salon, struck by falling shrapnel from an Iranian missile. This regime does not discriminate. You mentioned, some of you, the holy site in Jerusalem. But we have restrictions because it's dangerous. Can you imagine having thousands of worshippers, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, together in the old city? They even fired toward the holiest sites of 3 religions in Jerusalem, the Western Wall, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Temple Mount. Thank God, no one was killed, but the intent was clear. They targeted the old city of Jerusalem. This regime will stop at nothing. Iranians themselves are paying the price. More than 30,000 protesters were killed over 2 days in January. Executions are still happening. Just days ago, 3 young men were executed. Make no mistake, but the regime is weakening. We are hollowing out its leadership structure. We are creating the conditions for the Iranian people to rise and reclaim their future. Madam President, when you are dealing with this kind of evil, this sort of radical extremist ideology, you can try to trim it. And we know we tried it with Hamas in the past. You can try to trim it from above, or you can uproot it. Uprooting is much, much harder than simply trimming, but it is the only way to actually get rid of it. Because if you only cut it back just like weeds, you know what happens? It goes back, stronger, desperate, and more dangerous. That brings me to Lebanon. For decades we were told, even in this room, just trim the weeds from above, live with Hezbollah, contain it. Let's do another ceasefire. Let's give diplomacy a chance. In 1993, in 1996, in 2000, in 2006, in 2023, and again in the ceasefire of November 2024, we were told the same thing. Step back, let diplomacy work, let the Lebanese government take control. Many in the international community warned against escalation. They called for immediate ceasefires and space for diplomacy. And we listened, we agreed, we came to the table, and what happened? Hezbollah, still there, filled the vacuum, rebuilt, rearmed, entrenched itself deeper. On the 2nd of March, they attacked us again. We had a ceasefire, only November 24, but nothing happened. They decided that they want to avenge the death of the Iranian regime's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. No consultation with the Lebanese government, Lebanese people, that's it. One phone call from Tehran. They fire rockets, UAVs, and missiles at our people. Since the 3rd of March, more than 920 launches have come from south of the Litani River alone. And I remind you that under Resolution 1701, that number should be 0. They shouldn't be there. The Lebanese government has failed, despite their declarations, despite the fact they expelled the Iranian ambassador today. Despite everything they say, Hezbollah continues to operate freely south of the Litani, threatening our communities. Residents of northern Israel have been under constant attacks. Just hours ago, before we started this debate, Hezbollah fired 38 rockets into northern Israel. One woman was killed. 2 others were wounded. You don't hear about it. This is happening now, as we speak. Lebanon is being dragged into a conflict it did not choose. We want a peaceful future for Lebanon, but that cannot exist while Hezbollah holds it hostage. Madam President, let me share with you the reality we are facing on the ground in Israel today. When Hezbollah launches one of their rockets, and it happens almost every day, this is what Israelis hear. When you hear this siren, you have 15 seconds to seek shelter. Think about that for one moment, what it means. 15 seconds. Imagine you are at home, you have 3 children. Which one do you take with you first? Do you go back for the others? Do you carry your elderly parents? What if you are outside now? 15 seconds. That's it. That is our reality. And many times it's not long enough. Yaron and Ilana Moshe, an elderly couple in their 70s, heard that siren last week. They follow instructions. They rushed toward the bomb shelter, but the missile struck before they could get there. They were just meters away. Their bodies were found together with a walker beside them. Yet still, we are told by some who have concerns about our operation in Lebanon to stop, to have a ceasefire, to give diplomacy another chance. We have, and every time it has failed. Not because of escalation, but because even in calm, Hezbollah rebuilt. So where does that leave us today? We cannot return to temporary solutions that guarantee future wars. We have come too far. We will ensure that Iran's terrorist proxies stop firing at our people. Madam President, we do not seek endless conflict with Lebanon. We do not want to live under constant threat. We want a different future, a stable Middle East, a peaceful Middle East, one where countries build partnerships, not proxies, where people live without fear, where alliances replace terror. That is what we are working toward. But until we get there, this is a reality. Israel reaches forward with both hands. One extended to moderate, peace-seeking partners in our region. The other hammering the Iranian regime and its terrorist proxies. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Israel for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. It gives me great honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the Arab group. Madam President, the Security Council meets today not to review the losses, but also to listen to the voice of justice. And justice is being tested before the eyes of the world. We're discussing the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and the implementation of Resolution 2334 at a sensitive time where geography and conscience intersect, where the balance of international legitimacy is being questioned and asked. Are the resolutions that we are adopting still able to protect what is left of our hope? What we are witnessing is not simply a simple passing violation of a resolution. Rather, it's a systemic undermining of our collective will. It is a blatant belittlement of the credibility of this council. This is a blatant challenge to our combined will. The Israeli occupation authorities continue their policies that blatantly ignore international law and that render Resolution 2334 completely void of any content by establishing a settlement reality that is expanding unchecked, forced displacement that uproots Palestinians from their land and turn them into witnesses of the gradual eradication of their memories and of their identity. We find an uptick in aggressive statements that are against the Palestinian Authority by the officials in the occupation authority. This is a reflection of dangerous desires that aim to kill any horizons for a just solution. Harming the Palestinian Authority does not just mean weakening that institution. Rather, it undermines the very foundation upon which a Palestinian state can be founded. And in light of this escalation, we find an increase in the settlement activities, an expedited increase, and this is accompanied by an escalation of the terrorism of the settlers, a terrorism that is practiced on a near daily basis with clear impunity and in a daily image of systematic intimidation. Palestinians have become strangers in their own land. They have become witnesses to daily attempts to eliminate their existence on their very own land. These policies make the two-state solution, which was endorsed by international legitimacy, a target that is going further and further every day and becoming harder and harder to achieve. Therefore, the Arab group stresses the utmost importance of maintaining the Palestinian Authority, of empowering it through all means that would allow it to perform its duties as a primary foundation of any political track, a serious political track, and a guarantee to maintain the minimum level of stability. Madam President, in Jerusalem, Al-Quds, gates are not simply being closed. Rather, hope is ending. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Holy Al-Aqsa campus and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre remains with their doors closed to visitors. This is an unprecedented case in history, even in the worst moments and darkest moments of history. There, where worship was a right guaranteed, faith is being besieged before it is expressed. The Arab group condemns, in the strongest of terms, the continued closure of the doors of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre by the Israeli occupation authorities, and their continued prevention of worshippers from performing their religious rites. These measures are a blatant violation of international law and international humanitarian law. They are an unprecedented propagation of the sentiments of Muslims and Christians throughout the world. These measures undermine the freedom of worship and the unhindered access to holy sites. Based on the above, the Arab group demands the international community, including the Security Council, to shoulder their responsibilities and to adopt a firm position that obliges Israel as the occupying power to put an end to these violations. The Arab group confirms the need to respect the historic and legal status quo in Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and to secure the sanctity of Muslim and Christian holy sites and not undermine their Arab, Islamic, and Christian identity. Madam President, the pain in the West Bank is embodied in the erosion that we see. Meanwhile, Gaza is bleeding openly. Despite the hope that started after the ceasefire agreement, this hope, however, is dwindling day by day before the continued violations. The occupying power continues to violate its obligations in a pattern that reflects its disregard for the agreements signed and for the international efforts made. The number of martyrs since the 10th of October has reached 687 martyrs. Those injured number at 1,849. These are numbers that cannot simply be summarized as statistics. Rather, they embody life stories, stories of lives interrupted, families that lost their loved ones. This is a blatant violation, and this must not be allowed to pass quietly and must not be met with silence, a silence that can be interpreted as accepting the fait accompli. The entry of humanitarian caravan trucks has been greatly limited lately, while needs are continuously increasing and while life is becoming harder and harder. And the return of the displaced to Gaza is also facing measures that obstruct this return in a clear violation of the agreements. In return, efforts to reconstruct Gaza have not made any mentionable progress, despite international promises. The destruction remains. It remains as a witness to the gap between what is said and what is done, a witness to our organization's paralysis. Madam President, the Arab group stresses that the West Bank, including Al-Quds al-Sharif and the Gaza Strip, is a full and complete geographic and integrated geographic and political unit. It is the Palestinian body. It cannot be divided, and it cannot be separated into different components, because rights cannot be separated and justice cannot be divided. Therefore, we renew our reminders that a just and lasting solution to the Palestinian cause cannot be achieved without allowing the Palestinian people to enjoy their inalienable right to self-determination and an independent state on the 4 June 1967 lines with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Madam President, Palestine is more than just a cause. It is a test. It is a continued test to the conscience of the world. And while we hold one meeting after the other, and we issue one statement after the other, the question continues unanswered. What will this Council do? Does this Council have the ability to change the way things are going? I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.